We are reading White Fang. Yeah, White Fang. I have higher expectations for this novel. My wife assures me it is a feel-good story. I'm sure it's got a puppy in it, but the puppy comes from an unfortunate place. It can't go to a better place if you don't come from an unfortunate place. And so I will probably cry. That's okay. Let's find the book here. Get the book out. How on earth did the book get down there? Jesus. Yeesh. Oh, I bet you I didn't. So this is you can't see the frame on here. It's the bottom of the book is at the bottom of this of the frame now. And if I bring it down now, the top of this picture, the transparent part is at the top of the frame. So it's quite a bit bigger. I just didn't trim the image properly. But here we go. It's fine. The book needs to be big though, because otherwise I can't see the text. And if I can't see the text, I can't stumble over the words I don't know before, striking them out of the lexicon of the human vocabulary. Nice. So cool. We have all the bits and pieces, right? These are getting so much easier to do. I even have the appropriate website opened and zoomed in by 300% this time. Maybe that's not necessary. Can I do... Let's go back to 200. My customary 200%. Yeah, that should do. We were eating pizza today, and some of the crust kind of poked into the roof of my mouth. It's a little uncomfortable. All right. If everything is fine, we shall get into White Fang. I have my water. I just took a sip now, thank you. All right. Part 1, Chapter 1, The Trail of the Beat. Dark spruce forests frowned on either side of the frozen waterway. The trees had been stripped by a recent wind of their white covering frost, and they seemed to lean towards each other, black and ominous in the fading light. A vast silence reigned over the land. The land itself was a desolation, lifeless, without movement, so lone and cold that the spirit of it was not even that of sadness. There was a hint in it of laughter, but of a laughter more terrible than any sadness, a laughter that was mirthless as the smile of the Sphinx, a laughter cold as the frost and partaking of the grimness of infallibility. Is infallibility grim? Yes, it says infallibility. It was the masterful and incommunicable wisdom of eternity laughing at the futility of life and the effort of life. It was the wild, the savage, frozen-hearted Northland wild. Hello, Sage. From your typing, I assume you are drunk. Yeah, slurping bully. What? Are you okay? Imagine drinking on a Monday night. But there was life, abroad in the land and defiant. Down the frozen waterway toiled a string of wolfish dogs. Their bristly fur was rimed with frost. Their breath froze in the air as it left their mouths, spouting forth in spumes of vapor that settled upon the hair of their bodies and formed into crystals of frost. Leather harness was on the dogs, and leather traces attached them to a sled which dragged along behind. The sled was without runners. It was made of stout birch bark, and its full surface rested on the snow. The front end of the sled was turned up like a scroll in order to force down and under the bore of soft snow that surged like a wave before it. On the sled, securely lashed, was a long and narrow oblong box. There were other things on the sled, blankets, an axe, and a coffee pot and a frying pan, but prominent, occupying most of the space, was the long and narrow oblong box. In advance of the dogs, on wide snowshoes, toiled a man. At the rear of the sled toiled a second man. On the sled in the box lay a third man whose toil was over. A man whom the wild had conquered and beaten down until he would never move nor struggle again. It is not the way of the wild to like movement. Life is an offense to it, for life is movement, and the wild aims always to destroy movement. It freezes the water to prevent it running to the sea. It drives the sap out of the trees till they are frozen to their mighty hearts, and most ferociously and terribly of all does the wild harry and crush into submission man who is the most restless of life, ever in revolt against the dictum that all movement must in the end come to the cessation of movement. I'm not sure I agree with all that there, but that's okay. That's the author's story. But at front and rear, unawed and indomitable, toiled the two men who were not yet dead. Their bodies were covered with fur and soft-tanned leather. Eyelashes and cheeks and lips were so coated with the crystals from their frozen breath that their faces were not discernible. This gave them the seeming of ghostly masks, undertakers in the spectral world at the funeral of some ghost. But under it all they were men, penetrating the land of desolation and mockery and silence, puny adventurers bent on colossal adventure, pitting themselves against the might of a world as remote and alien and pulseless as the abysses of space. Or abysses. They traveled on without speech, saving their breath for the work of their bodies. On every side was the silence, pressing upon them with a tangible presence. It affected their minds as the many atmospheres of deep water affect the body of the diver. Hard disagree. Meditative, peaceful silence versus being crushed to death or getting the bends when you come up. A little different, I say. It crushed them with the weight of unending vastness and unalterable decree. It crushed them into the remotest recesses of their own minds, pressing out of them, like juices from the grape, all the false ardors and exaltations and undue self-values of the human soul, until they perceived themselves finite and small, specks and motes, moving with weak cunning and little wisdom amidst the play and interplay of the great blind elements and forces. This is like, I'm introducing now two men and some dogs in a sleigh, in a cold wilderness. An hour went by, and a second hour. The pale light of the short, sunless day was beginning to fade, when a faint, far cry arose on the still air. It soared upward with a swift rush till it reached its topmost note, where it persisted, palpitant and tense, and then slowly died away. It might have been a lost soul wailing, had it not been invested with a certain sad fierceness and hungry eagerness. The front man turned his head until his eyes met the eyes of the man behind, and then, across the narrow oblong box, each nodded to the other. A second cry arose, piercing the silence with needle-like shrillness. Both men located the sound. It was to the rear, somewhere in the snow expanse they had just traversed. A third and answering cry arose, also to the rear and to the left of the second cry. "They're after us, Bill," said the man at the front. His voice sounded hoarse and unreal. He had spoken with apparent effort. "Meat is scarce," answered his comrade. "I ain't seen a rabbit sign for days." Thereafter they spoke no more, though their ears were keen for the hunting cries that continued to rise behind them. At the fall of darkness, they swung the dogs into a cluster of spruce trees on the edge of the waterway and made a camp. The coffin at the side of the fire served for seat and table. That's grim. The wolf dogs, clustered on the far side of the fire, snarled and bickered among themselves, but evinced no inclination to stray off into the darkness. Seems to me, Henry, they're staying remarkably close to camp, Bill commented. Henry squatted over the fire and settled the pot of coffee with a piece of ice. Nodded. Nor did he speak till he had taken his seat on the coffin and begun to eat. They know where their hides is safe, he said. They'd sooner eat grub than be grub, and they're pretty wise, them dogs. Bill shook his head. Oh, I don't know. His comrade looked at him curiously. First time I ever heard you say anything about their not being wise. Henry, said the other, munching with deliberation the beans he was eating, did you happen to notice the way them dogs kicked up when I was a-feeding them? They did cut up more than usual, Henry acknowledged. How many dogs we've got, Henry? 6. Well, Henry. Bill stopped for a moment, in order that his words might gain greater significance. As I was saying, Henry, we've got 6 dogs. I took 6 fish out of the bag, gave 1 fish to each dog, and Henry, I was 1 fish short. You counted wrong. We've got 6 dogs, the other reiterated dispassionately. I took out 6 fish. 1 ear didn't get no fish. I came back to the bag afterward and got him his fish. We've only got 6 dogs, Henry said. Henry, Bill went on, I won't say they was all dogs, but there was 7 of them that got fish. They had a baby? Henry stopped eating to glance across the fire and count the dogs. There's only 6 now, he said. I saw the other one of them run off across the snow, Bill announced with cool positiveness. I saw 7. Henry looked at him commiseratingly and said, I'll be almighty glad when this trip's over. What do you mean by that? Bill demanded. I mean that this load of our'n is getting on your nerves, and that you're beginning to see things. I thought of that, Bill answered gravely. And so, when I saw it run off across the snow, I looked in the snow and I saw its tracks. Then I counted the dogs, and there was still 6 of them. 6 of them. The tracks is there in the snow now. Do you want to look at 'em? I'll show 'em to you. Henry did not reply, but munched on in silence, until, the meal finished, he topped it with a final cup of coffee. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and said, Then you're thinking as it was. A long, wailing cry, fiercely sad from somewhere in the darkness, had interrupted him. He stopped to listen to it. Then he finished his sentence with a wave of his hand toward the sound of the cry. One of them? Bill nodded. I'd a blame sight sooner think that than anything else. You noticed yourself the row the dogs made. Cry after cry and answering cries were turning the silence into a bedlam. From every side the cries arose, and the dogs betrayed their fear by huddling together and so close to the fire that their hair was scorched by the heat. Bill threw on more wood before lighting his pipe. I'm thinking you're down in the mouth some, Henry said. Henry, he sucked meditatively at his pipe for some time before he went on. Henry, I was a-thinking, what a blame sight luckier he is than you and me'll ever be. He indicated the third person by a downward thrust of the thumb to the box on which they sat. You and me, Henry. When we die, we'll be lucky if we get enough stones over our carcasses to keep the dogs off of us. But we ain't got people and money and all the rest like him, Henry rejoined. Long-distance funerals is something you and me can't exactly afford. What gets me, Henry, is what a chap like this that's a lord or something in his own country and that's never had to bother about grub nor blankets, why he comes a button around for the godforsaken ends of the earth. That's what I can't exactly see. He might have lived to a ripe old age if he'd stayed at home, Henry agreed. Bill opened his mouth to speak, but changed his mind. Instead, he pointed towards the wall of darkness that pressed about them from every side. There was no suggestion of form in their utter blackness. Only could be seen a pair of eyes gleaming like live coals. Henry indicated with his head a second pair and a third. His circle of the gleaming eyes had drawn about their camp. Now and again a pair of eyes moved, or disappeared to appear again a moment later. The unrest of the dogs had been increasing, and they stampeded in a surge of sudden fear to the near side of the fire, cringing and crawling about the legs of the men. In the scramble, one of the dogs had been overturned on the edge of the fire, and it had yelped with pain and fright as the smell of its singed coat possessed the air. The commotion caused the circle of eyes to shift restlessly for a moment and even to withdraw a bit, but it settled down again as the dogs became quiet. Henry, it's a blame misfortune to be out of ammunition. Bill had finished his pipe and was helping his companion to spread the bed of fur and blanket upon the spruce boughs which he had laid over the snow before supper. Henry grunted, began unlacing his moccasins. "How many cartridges did you say you had left?" he asked. 3, came the answer. And I wishn't it was 300. Then I'd show 'em what for, damn 'em. He shook his fist angrily at the gleaming eyes and began securely to prop his moccasins before the fire. And I wishn't this cold snapped break. I wish this cold snapped break, he went on. I guess he doesn't like the cold. So the vocabulary here, it makes me have to flex my mouth and tongue a little bit more, but it sure as hell is not the worst language I've ever had to read. He went on, "It's been 50 below for 2 weeks now, and I wishn't I had never started on this trip, Henry. I don't like the looks of it. I don't feel right somehow, and while I'm I wished the trip was over and done with, and you and me a-sittin' by the fire in Fort McGurry just about now and playing cribbage. That's what I wished. Wished. There's a T at the end of wish. Wished. That's what I wished." Fair enough, it's a wished. No, just a bit of an accent. Yeah, there's a bit of an accent. Henry grunted and crawled into bed. As he dozed off, he was aroused by his comrade's voice. "Say, Henry, that other one that come in and got a fish, why didn't the dogs pitch into it? That's bothering me. That's what's bothering me." "You're bothering too much, Bill," came a sleepy response. "You was never like this before. You just shut up now and go to sleep, and you'll be all the hunky-dory in the morning. Your stomach's sour. That's what's bothering you." The men slept, breathing heavily, side by side under the one covering. The fire died down and the gleaming eyes drew closer, the circle they had flung about the camp. The dogs clustered together in fear, now and again snarling menacingly as a pair of eyes drew close. Once, their uproar became so loud that Bill woke. He got out of bed carefully so as not to disturb the sleep of his comrade, and threw more wood on the fire. As it began to flame up, the circle of eyes drew farther back. He glanced casually at the huddling dogs. He rubbed his eyes and looked at them more sharply. Then he crawled back into the blankets. "Henry," he said. "Oh, Henry. That'll be a chocolate in the future." It's where it came from. White Fang, origin of O. Henry. Henry groaned as he passed from sleep to waking and demanded, "What's wrong now?" "Nothing," came the answer. Only there's 7 of them again. I just counted. There's an ambassador wolf. That's what's happening here. Henry acknowledged receipt of the information with a grunt that slid into a snore as he drifted back into sleep. In the morning, it was Henry who awoke first and routed his companion out of bed. Daylight was yet 3 hours away, though it was already 6 o'clock, and in the darkness Henry went about preparing breakfast, while Bill rolled the blankets and made the sled ready for lashing. "Say, Henry," he asked suddenly, "how many dogs did you say we had?" 6. Wrong, Bill proclaimed triumphantly. 7 again, Henry queried. "No, 5. One's gone." "The hell?" Henry cried in wrath, leaving the cooking to come and count the dogs. "You're right, Bill," he concluded. "Fatty's gone. And," he went on like greased lightning once he got started, "couldn't have seen him for smoke." Sorry. The whole sentence. "And he went like greased lightning once he got started. Couldn't have seen him for smoke." "No chance at all," Henry concluded. "They just swallowed him alive. I bet he was yelping as you went down their throats, damn him." He always was a fool dog," said Bill. "But no fool dog ought to be fool enough to go off and commit suicide that way." He looked over the remainder of the team with a speculative eye that summed up instantly the salient traits of each animal. "I bet none of the others would do it." "Couldn't drive him away from the fire with a club," Bill agreed. "I always did think there was something wrong with Fatty anyway." And this was the epitaph of a dead dog on a Northland trail, less scant than the epitaph of many another dog, of many a man. Makes it sound like the end of the story. Chapter 2. The She-Wolf. Breakfast eaten and the slim camp outfit lashed to the sled, the men turned their backs on the cheery fire and launched out into the darkness. No, you have to put your fires out." At once began to rise the cries that were fiercely sad, cries that called through the darkness and called to one another and answered back. Conversation ceased. Daylight came at 9 o'clock. At midday, the sky to the south warmed to a rose color and marked where the bulge of the earth intervened between the meridian sun and the northern world. But the rose color swiftly faded. The gray light of day that remained lasted until 3 o'clock, when it too faded, and the pall of the Arctic night descended upon the lone and silent land. As darkness came on, the hunting cries to the right and left and rear drew closer, so close that more than once they sent surges of fear through the toiling dogs, throwing them into short-lived panics. At the conclusion of one such panic, when he and Henry had got the dogs back in the traces, Bill said, "I wished they'd strike the game somewheres and go away and leave us alone." "They do get on the nerves, horrible," Henry sympathized. They spoke no more until camp was made. Henry was bending over and adding ice to the babbling pot of beans when he was startled by the sound of a blow, an exclamation from Bill, and a sharp snarling cry of pain from among the dogs. He straightened up in time to see a dim form disappearing across the snow into the shelter of the dark. Then he saw Bill, standing amid the dogs, half triumphant, half crestfallen. In one hand a stout club, in the other the tail and part of the body of a sun-cured salmon. "It got half of it," he announced, "but I got a whack at it just the same. Do you hear it squeal?" "What did it look like?" Henry asked. "Couldn't see, but it had 4 legs and a mouth and hair and looked like any dog. Must be a tame wolf, I reckon." It's damned tame, whatever it is, coming in here at feeding time and getting its whack of fish. That night, when supper was finished and they sat on the oblong box and pulled at their pipes, the circle of gleaming eyes drew in even closer than before. They're getting braver. I wished they'd spring up a bunch of moose or something and go away and leave us alone, Bill said. Henry grunted with an intonation that was not all sympathy, and for a quarter of an hour they sat on in silence. Henry staring at the fire, and Bill at the circle of eyes that burned in the darkness just beyond the firelight. I wished we was pulling into McGurry right now, he began again. Shut up your wishing and your croaking, Henry burst out angrily. Your stomach's sour, that's what's ailing you. Swallow a spoonful of soddy and you'll sweeten up wonderful and be more pleasant company. In the morning, Henry was aroused by fervid blasphemy that proceeded from the mouth of Bill. Henry propped himself up on an elbow and looked to see his comrade standing among the dogs beside the replenished fire, his arms raised in abjuration, his face distorted with passion. "Hello?" Henry called. "What's up now?" "Frog's gone," came the answer. "No. I tell you yes." "Yeah, for now." Henry leaped out of the blankets into the dogs. He counted them with care and then joined his partner in cursing the power of the wild that had robbed them of another dog. "Frog was the strongest dog of the bunch," Bill pronounced finally. "And he was no fool dog either," Henry added. And so was recorded the second epitaph in 2 days. Epitaph. Oh, that reminds me. A good number of horror stories start this way, right? We're fine, and then, oh, we lost one dog. Oh, that's tragic. We can still make do, and then it escalates, and soon they will all be dead in food in wolf tummies. Right, exactly. By the way, Valana, I completely ignored your 100 stream streak. I saw that and got distracted. Yeah, slowly being picked off. That's fucking crazy, though. Oh, well, on to 200. A gloomy breakfast was eaten, and the 4 remaining dogs were harnessed to the sled. I owe you hot, juicy meat. That's true. That's correct. Yes, I owe you hot, juicy meat. That's right. I remember. A gloomy breakfast was eaten, and the 4 remaining dogs were harnessed to the sled. The day was a repetition of the days that had gone before. The men toiled without speech across the face of the frozen world. The silence was unbroken save by the cries of their pursuers that, unseen, hung upon their rear. With the coming of the night in the mid-afternoon, the cries sounded closer as the pursuers drew in according to their custom, and the dogs grew excited and frightened, and were guilty of panics that tangled the traces and further depressed the 2 men. "There, that'll fix you fool critters," Bill said with satisfaction that night, standing erect at completion of his task. Henry left the cooking to come and see. Not only had his partner tied the dogs up, but he had tied them after the Indian fashion with sticks. About the neck of each dog he had fastened a leather thong. To this, and so close to the neck that the dog could not get his teeth to it, he had tied a stout stick 4 or 5 feet in length. The other end of the stick, in turn, was made fast to a stake in the ground by means of a leather thong. The dog was unable to gnaw through the leather at his own neck of the stick. The stick prevented him from getting at the leather that fastened to the other end. Henry nodded his head approvingly, and I probably should have said a Native American rather than Indian. My apologies. "It's the only contraption that'll ever hold one ear," he said. "He can gnaw through leather as clean as a knife and just about half as quick. And they all repeat the L's, be here in the morning hunky-dory." You just bet they will, Bill affirmed. If one of them turns up missing, I'll go without my coffee. What a grand sacrifice. They just know we ain't loaded to kill, Henry remarked at bedtime, indicating the gleaming circle that hemmed them in. If we could put a couple of shots into them, they'd be more respectful. They come closer every night. Get the firelight out of your eyes and look hard there. Did you see that one? The problem with tying them up like that is they can't defend themselves or fight back at all. But I guess I don't know. We don't know exactly how they're being taken. I guess one of them dashes off into the dark at some stupid point. I think that's the implication anyhow. For some time, the two men amused themselves with watching the movement of vague forms on the edge of the firelight. By looking closely and steadily at where a pair of eyes burned in the darkness, the form of the animal would slowly take shape. They could even see these forms move at times. A sound among the dogs attracted the men's attention. One ear was uttering quick, eager whines, lunging at the length of his stick toward the darkness, and desisting now and then in order to make frantic attacks on the stick with his teeth. "Look at that, Bill," Henry whispered. Full into the firelight, with a stealthy, sidelong movement, glided a dog-like animal. It moved with commingled mistrust and daring, cautiously observing the men, its attention fixed on the dogs. One ear strained at full length of the stick toward the intruder and whined with eagerness. "That fool One Ear don't seem scared much," Bill said in a low tone. "It's a she-wolf," Henry whispered back. "And that accounts for Fatty and Frog. She's the decoy for the pack. She draws out the dog and then all the rest pitches in and eats him up." The fire crackled, just like my fireplace here in the library. A log fell apart with a loud spluttering noise. At the sound of it, the strange animal leapt back into the darkness. "Henry, I'm a-thinkin'," Bill announced. "Thinkin' what?" "I'm a-thinkin' that there was the one I lambasted with the club." "Ain't the slightest doubt in the world," was Henry's response. "And right here I want to remark," Bill went on, that the animal's familiarity with campfires is suspicious and immoral. How dare the she-wolf appreciate campfires? "It knows for certain more than a self-respecting wolf ought to know," Henry agreed. "A wolf that knows enough to come in with the dogs at feeding time has had experiences." "Old Villain had a dog once that run away with the wolves," Bill cogitates aloud. "I ought to know. I shot it out of the pack in a moose pasture over on Little Stick. And Old Villain cried like a baby. Hadn't seen it for 3 years, he said. Been with the wolves all that time." "I reckon you've called the turn, Bill. That wolf's a dog, and it's eaten fish many's the time from the hand of man." "And if I get a chance at it, that wolf that's a dog'll be just meat," Bill declared. "We can't afford to lose no more animals." "But you've only got 3 cartridges," Henry objected. "I'll wait for a dead sure shot," was the reply. In the morning, Henry renewed the fire and cooked breakfast to the accompaniment of his partner's snoring. "He was sleeping just too comfortable for anything," Henry told him as he routed him out for breakfast. "I hadn't the heart to rouse you." Bill began to eat sleepily. He noticed that his cup was empty and started to reach for the pot, but the pot was beyond arm's length and beside Henry. "Say, Henry," he chided gently, "ain't you forgot something?" Henry looked about with great carefulness and shook his head. Bill held up the empty cup. "You don't get no coffee," Henry announced. "Ain't run out?" Bill asked anxiously. "Nope." "Ain't thinking it'll hurt my digestion?" "Nope." A flush of angry blood pervaded Bill's face. "Then it's just warm and anxious and I'm to be hearing you explain yourself," he said. "Spanker's gone," Henry answered. Without haste, With the air of one resigned to misfortune, Bill turned his head and from where he sat counted the dogs. How'd it happen? He asked apathetically. Henry shrugged his shoulders. Don't know. Unless One Ear gnawed him loose, he couldn't have done it himself, that's sure. The darned cuss. Bill spoke gravely and slowly, with no hint of the anger that was raging within. Just because he couldn't chew himself loose, he chews Spanker loose. Well, Spanker's troubles is over anyway. I guess he's digested by this time and cavorting over the landscape in the bellies of 20 different wolves, was Henry's epitaph on this, the latest lost dog. Have some coffee, Bill. But Bill shook his head. Go on, Henry pleaded, elevating the pot. Bill shoved his cup aside. I'll be ding-dong-danged if I do. If I said I wouldn't if any dog turned up missing, and I won't. Sorry, I said I wouldn't, yes. It's darn good coffee, Henry said enticingly. But Bill was stubborn, and he ate a dry breakfast washed down with mumbled curses at One Ear for the trick he had played. I'll tie him up out of reach of each other tonight, Bill said, as they took the trail. That must be rough on the remaining dogs. You only got like half the workforce left. They had traveled little more than 100 yards when Henry, who was in front, bent down and picked up something with which his snowshoe had collided. It was dark, and he could not see it, but he recognized it by the touch. He flung it back so that it struck the sled and bounced along it until it fetched up on Bill's snowshoes. Maybe you'll need that in your business, Henry said. Bill uttered an exclamation. It was all that was left of Spanker, the stick with which he had been tied. Poor puppy. They ate him, hide and all, Bill announced. The stick's as clean as a whistle. They've ate the leather off in both ends. They're damn hungry, Henry, and they'll have you and me guessing before this trip's over. Henry laughed defiantly. I ain't been trailed this way by wolves before, but I've gone through a whole lot worse and kept my health. Takes more than a handful of them pesky critters to do yours truly, Bill, my son. I wonder if they're actually related that way. I don't know, Bill muttered ominously. Well, you'll know all right when we pull into McGurry. I ain't feeling special enthusiastic, Bill persisted. You're off color. That's what's the matter with you, Henry dogmatized. What you need is equine, and I'm not equine. And I'm going to dose you up stiff as soon as we make McGurry. I'm gonna assume that's some sort of alcohols. Bill grunted his disagreement with the diagnosis and lapsed into silence. The day was like all the days. Light came at 9 o'clock. At 12 o'clock, the southern horizon was warmed by the unseen sun, and then began the cold gray of afternoon that would merge 3 hours later into night. It was just after the sun's futile effort to appear that Bill slipped the rifle from under the sled lashings and said, You keep right on, Henry. I'm going to see what I can see. I wonder if the last time we see Bill. You'd better stick by the sled, his partner protested. You've only got 3 cartridges and there's no telling what might happen. Who's croaking now? Bill demanded triumphantly. Henry made no reply and plodded on alone. Though often he cast anxious glances back into the gray solitude where his partner had disappeared. An hour later, taking advantage of the cut-offs around which the sled had to go, Bill arrived. They're scattering and ranging along wide, he said, keeping up with us and looking for game at the same time. You see, they're sure of us. They only know they've got to wait to get us. In the meantime, they're willing to pick up anything eatable that comes handy. You mean they think they're sure of us? Henry objected pointedly. but Bill ignored him. "I seen some of them. They're pretty thin. They ain't had a bite in weeks, I reckon, outside of Fatty and Frog and Spanker, and there's so many of them that didn't go far. They're remarkable thin. The ribs is like washboards, and their stomachs is right up against their backbones. They're pretty desperate, I can tell you. They'll be going mad yet, and then watch out." A few minutes later, Henry, who was now traveling behind the sled, emitted a low warning whistle. Bill turned and looked, then quietly stopped the dogs. To the rear, from around the last bend and plainly into view on the very trail they had just covered, trotted a furry, slinking form. Its nose was to the trail, and it trotted with a peculiar, sliding, effortless gait. When they halted, it halted, throwing up its head and regarding them steadily with nostrils that twitched as it caught and studied the scent of them. "It's the she-wolf," Bill answered. The dogs had lain down in the snow and he walked past them to join his partner in the sled. Together they watched the strange animal that had pursued them for days and that had already accomplished the destruction of half of their dog team. After a searching scrutiny, the animal trotted forward a few steps. This it repeated several times till it was a short 100 yards away. It paused, head up, close by a clump of spruce trees, and with sight and scent studied the outfit of the watching men. It looked at them in a strangely wistful way, after the manner of a dog, but in its wistfulness there was none of the dog affection. It was a wistfulness bred of hunger, as cruel as its own fangs and merciless as the frost itself. It was large for a wolf, its gaunt frame advertising the lines of an animal that was among the largest of its kind. "Stands pretty close to 2.5 feet at the shoulders," Henry commented. "And I'll bet it ain't far from 5 feet long." "Kind of strange color for a wolf," was Bill's criticism. "I've never seen a red wolf before. She looks almost cinnamon to me." The animal was certainly not cinnamon-colored. Its coat was the true wolf coat. The dominant color was gray, and yet there was to it a faint reddish hue, a hue that was baffling, that appeared and disappeared, that was more like an illusion of the vision, now gray, distinctly gray, and again giving hints and glints of a vague redness of color not classifiable in terms of ordinary experience. Oh, it's a Cthulhu dog. You can see colors that are unseeable. "Looks for all the world like a big husky sled dog," Bill said. "I wouldn't be surprised to see it wag its tail." "Hello, you husky," he called. "Come here, you whatever your name is." "Ain't a bit scarent of you," Henry laughed. Bill waved his hand at it threateningly and shouted loudly, but the animal betrayed no fear. The only change in it that they could notice was an accession of alertness. It still regarded them with the merciless wistfulness of hunger. They were meat, and it was hungry, and it would like to go in and eat them if it dared. "Look here, Henry," Bill said, unconsciously lowering his voice to a whisper because of what he imitated. Or intimated. No, it's imitated. "We've got 3 cartridges, but it's a dead shot. Couldn't miss it. It's got away with 3 of our dogs, and we ought to put a stop to it. What do you say?" Henry nodded his consent. Bill cautiously slipped the gun from under the sled lashing. The gun was on the way to his shoulder, but it never got there. For in that instant the she-wolf leapt sideways from the trail into the clump of spruce trees and disappeared. She knows the sight of a gun. The 2 men looked at each other. Henry whistled long and comprehendingly. "I might have known it," Bill chided himself aloud as he replaced the gun. "Of course, a wolf that knows enough to come in with the dogs at feeding time would know all about shooting irons." "I tell you right now, Henry, that critter's the cause of all our trouble. We'd have 6 dogs at the present time, instead of 3 if it wasn't for her. And I tell you right now, Henry, I'm going to get her. She's too smart to be shot in the open, but I'm going to lay for her. I'll bushwhack her as sure as my name is Bill. And we are going to pause for advertisements, as we normally do. 3 minutes, we'll be back. See you then. Alright, and the ads have concluded. Welcome back, everybody. Oh, I'm very full. We had dinner a little late. Let's see. Bill is planning to bushwhack the she-wolf. Let's see. You needn't stray off too far in doing it, his partner admonished. If that pack ever starts to jump you, them 3 cartridges would be worth no more than 3 whoops in hell. Them animals is damn hungry, and once they start in, they'll sure get you, Bill. Excuse me. They camped early that night. 3 dogs could not drag the sled so fast nor for so long hours as could 6. And they were showing unmistakable signs of playing out, and the men went early to bed. Bill first, seeing to it that the dogs were tied out of gnawing reach of one another. But the wolves were growing bolder, and the men were aroused more than once from their sleep. So near did the wolves approach that the dogs became frantic with terror, and it was necessary to replenish the fire from time to time in order to keep the adventurous marauders at safer distance. I've heard sailors talk of sharks following a ship, Bill remarked, as he crawled back into the blankets after one such replenishing of the fire. Well, them wolves is land sharks, and they know their business better than we do, and they ain't a holding our trail this way for their health. They're going to get us. They're sure going to get us, Henry. They've half got you already, and not talking like that, Henry retorted sharply. A man's half licked when he says he is, and you're half eaten from the way you're going on about it. They've got away with better men than you and me, Bill answered. Oh, shut up your croaking. You're making me all fired tired. You're making me all fired tired. There's a hyphen between all and fired. Interesting. Henry rolled over angrily on his side, but was surprised that Bill made no similar display of temper. This was not Bill's way, for he was easily angered by sharp words. Henry thought long over it before he went to sleep, and as his eyelids fluttered down and he dozed off, he thought in his mind was, there's no mistaking it. Bill's almighty blue. I'll have to cheer him up tomorrow. Chapter 3, The Hunger Cry. The day began auspiciously. They had lost no dogs during the night, and they swung out upon the trail and into the silence, the darkness, and the cold with spirits that were fairly light. Bill seemed to have forgotten his forebodings of the previous night, and even waxed facetiously with the dogs when, at midday, they overturned the sled on a bad piece of trail. It was an awkward mix-up. The sled was upside down and jammed between a tree trunk and a huge rock, and they were forced to unharness the dogs in order to straighten out the tangle. The 2 men were bent over the sled and trying to right it when Henry observed One Ear sliding away. "Here, you, One Ear!" he cried, straightening up, turning around on the dog. But One Ear broke into a run across the snow, his traces trailing behind him, and there, out in the snow of their backtrack, was the she-wolf waiting for him. As he neared her, he became suddenly cautious. He slowed down to an alert and mincing walk, and then stopped. He regarded her carefully and dubiously, yet desirefully. She seemed to smile at him, showing her teeth in an ingratiating rather than a menacing way. She moved toward him a few steps, playfully, and then halted. One Ear drew near to her, still alert and cautious, his tail and ears in the air, his head held high. He tried to sniff noses with her, but she retreated playfully and coyly. Every advance on his part was accompanied by a corresponding retreat on her part. Step by step, she was luring him away from the security of his human companionship. Once, as though a warning had in vague ways flitted through his intelligence, he turned his head and looked back at the overturned sled, at his teammates, at the two men who were calling to him. But whatever idea was forming in his mind was dissipated by the she-wolf, who advanced upon him, sniffed noses with him, and for a fleeting instant, and then resumed her coy retreat before his renewed advances. What a sly bitch. In the meantime, Bill had bethought himself of the rifle, but it was jammed beneath the overturned sled, and by the time Henry had helped him to right the load, One Ear and the she-wolf were too close together, and the distance too great to risk a shot. Too late. One Ear learned his mistake. Before they saw the cause, the two men saw him turn and start to run back toward them. Then, approaching at right angles to the trail and cutting off his retreat, they saw a dozen wolves, lean and gray, bounding across the snow. On the instant, the she-wolf's coyness and playfulness disappeared. With a snarl, she sprang upon One Ear. He thrust her off with his shoulder, and his retreat cut off, and still intent on regaining the sled. He altered his course in an attempt to circle around to it. More wolves were appearing every moment and joining in the chase. The she-wolf was one leap behind One Ear and holding her own. "Where are you going?" Henry suddenly demanded, laying his hand on his partner's arm. Bill shook it off. "I won't stand it," he said. "They ain't a-going to get any more of our dogs if I can help it." Gun in hand, he plunged into the underbrush that lined the side of the trail. His intention was apparent enough. Taking the sled as the center of the circle that One Ear was making, Bill planned to tap that circle at a point in advance of the pursuit. With his rifle in the broad daylight, it might be possible for him to awe the wolves and save the dog. "Say, Bill," Henry called after him, "be careful. Don't take no chances." Henry sat down on the sled and watched. There was nothing else for him to do. Bill had already gone from sight, but now and again, appearing and disappearing amongst the underbrush and the scattered clumps of spruce, could be seen One Ear. Henry judged his case to be hopeless. The dog was thoroughly alive to its danger, but it was running on the outer circle while the wolf pack was running on the inner and shorter circle. It was vain to think of One Ear so outdistancing his pursuers as to be able to cut across their circle in advance of them and to regain the sled. The different lines were rapidly approaching a point. Somewhere out there in the snow, screened from his sight by trees and thickets, Henry knew that the wolf pack, One Ear, and Bill were coming together. All too quickly, far more quickly than he had expected, it happened. He heard a shot, then two shots in rapid succession, and he knew that Bill's ammunition was gone. Then he heard a great outcry of snarls and yelps. He recognized One Ear's yell of pain and terror, and he heard a wolf cry that bespoke a stricken animal. And that was all. The snarls ceased. The yelping died away. Silence settled down again over the lonely land. He sat for a long while upon the sled. There was no need for him to go and see what had happened. He knew it, as though it had taken place before his eyes. Once, he roused with a start and hastily got the axe out from underneath the lashings. But for some time longer he sat and brooded, the two remaining dogs crouching and trembling at his feet. At last he arose in a weary manner, as though all the resilience had gone out of his body, and proceeded to fasten the dogs to the sled. He passed a rope over his shoulder, a man trace, and pulled with the dogs. He did not go far. At the first hint of darkness, he hastened to make a camp. He saw to it that he had a generous supply of firewood. He fed the dogs, cooked and ate his supper, and made his bed close to the fire. But he was not destined to enjoy that bed. Before his eyes closed, the wolves had drawn too near for safety. It no longer required an effort of the vision to see them. They were all about him and the fire, in a narrow circle, and he could see them plainly in the firelight, lying down, sitting up, crawling forward on their bellies or slinking back and forth. They even slept. Here and there he could see one curled up in the snow like a dog, taking the sleep that he was now denied himself. He kept the fire brightly blazing, for he knew that it alone intervened between the flesh of his body and their hungry fangs. His 2 dogs stayed close by him, one on either side, leaning against him for protection, crying and whimpering, and at times snarling desperately when a wolf approached a little closer than usual. At such moments, when his dogs snarled, the whole circle would be agitated, the wolves coming to their feet and pressing tentatively forward, a chorus of snarls and eager yelps rising about him. Then the circle would lie down again, and here and there a wolf would resume its broken nap. But this circle had a continuous tendency to draw in upon him, bit by bit, an inch at a time, with here a wolf bellying forward, and there a wolf bellying forward. The circle would narrow until the brutes were almost within springing distance. Then he would seize brands from the fire and hurl them into the pack. A hasty drawing back always resulted, accompanied by angry yelps and frightened snarls, when a well-aimed brand struck and scorched a too daring animal. Morning found the man haggard and worn. Wide-eyed from want of sleep, he cooked breakfast in the darkness, and at 9 o'clock, when, with the coming of daylight, the wolf pack drew back, he set about the task he had planned through the long hours of the night. Chopping down young saplings, he made them crossbars of a scaffold by lashing them high up into the trunks of standing trees. Using the sled lashing for a heaving rope, and with the aid of the dogs, he hoisted the coffin to the top of the scaffold. "They got Bill, and they may get me, but they'll sure never get you, young man," he said, addressing the dead body in its tree sepulcher. Sepulcher. It's sepulcher, I guess. What a weird thing to come across, like later on, if you just happen to be traveling this way, walking through the forest, looking up in the trees, and there's just this coffin hanging by a rope. Pretty crazy. Then he took the trail, and the lightened sled bounding along behind the willing dogs, for they too knew that safety lay open in the gaining of Fort McMurray. Oh no, that's right, Fort McMurray. The wolves were now more open in their pursuit, trotting sedately behind and ranging along on either side, their red tongues lolling out their lean sides, showing the undulating ribs with every movement. They were very lean, mere skin bags stretched over bony frames with strings for muscles. So lean that Henry found it in his mind to marvel that they still kept their feet and did not collapse forthright in the snow. Well, do remember, Henry, they've had a lot of meat lately. They probably have energy. He did not dare travel until dark. At midday, he did not dare travel until dark. At midday, not only did the sun warm the southern horizon, but it even thrust its upper rim pale and golden above the skyline. He received it as a sign. The days were growing longer, the sun was returning, but scarcely had the cheer of its light departed than he went into camp. There were still several hours of gray daylight and somber twilight until he utilized them in chopping an enormous supply of firewood. With night came horror. Not only were the starving wolves growing bolder, but lack of sleep was telling upon Henry. He dozed despite himself, crouching by the fire, the blankets about his shoulders, the axe between his knees, and on either side a dog pressing close against him. He awoke once and saw in front of him, not a dozen feet away, a big gray wolf, one of the largest of the pack. And even as he looked, the brute deliberately stretched himself after the manner of a lazy dog, yawning full in his face and looking upon him with a possessive eye, as if in truth he were merely a delayed meal that was soon to be eaten. This certitude was shown by the whole pack. Fully a score he could count, staring hungrily at him or calmly sleeping in the snow. They reminded him of children gathered about a spread table and awaiting permission to begin to eat, and he was the food they were to eat. He wondered how and when the meal would begin. As he piled wood on the fire, he discovered an appreciation of his own body which he had never felt before. He watched his moving muscles and was interested in the cunning mechanism of his fingers. By the light of the fire, he crooked his fingers slowly and repeatedly, now one at a time, now all together, spreading them wide or making quick gripping movements. He studied the nail formation and prodded the fingertips now sharply and again softly, gauging the nerve sensations produced. Gauging the while the nerve sensations produced fascinated him, and he grew suddenly fond of this subtle flesh of his that worked so beautifully and smoothly and delicately. Then he would cast a glance of fear at the wolf circle drawn expectantly about him, and like a blow the realization would strike him that this wonderful body of his, this living flesh, was no more than so much meat, a quest of ravenous animals to be torn and slashed by their hungry fangs, to be sustenance to them, as the moose and the rabbit had often been sustenance to him. Ah, the circle of life. He came out of a doze that was half nightmare, to see the red-hued she-wolf before him. She was not more than half a dozen feet away and sitting in the snow and wistfully regarding him. The two dogs were whimpering and snarling at his feet, but she took no notice of them. She was looking at the man, and for some time he returned her look. There was nothing threatening about her. She looked at him merely with a great wistfulness, but he knew it to be the wistfulness of an equally great hunger. He was the food, and the sight of him excited her in the gustatory sensations. The gustatory. Her mouth opened, the saliva drooled forth, and she licked her chops with the pleasure of anticipation. Or, just a dog that drools a lot. That happens too. I know those dogs. A spasm of fear went through him. He reached hastily for a brand to throw at her, but even as he reached, and before his fingers had closed in the missile, she sprang back into safety. And he knew that she was used to having things thrown at her. She had snarled as she sprang away, bearing white fangs to their roots, all her wistfulness vanishing, being replaced by a carnivorous malignity malignity that made him shudder. He glanced at the hand that held the brand, noticing the cunning delicacy of the fingers that gripped it, how they adjusted themselves to all the inequalities of the surface, curling over and under and about the rough wood. And one little finger, too close to the burning portion of the brand, sensitively and automatically writhing back from the hurtful heat to a cooler gripping place. And in the same instant he seemed to see a vision of those same sensitive and delicate fingers being crushed and torn by the white teeth of the she-wolf. Never had he been so fond of this body of his as now, when his tenure of it was so precarious, in fact. All night, with burning brands, he fought off the hungry pack. When he dozed, despite himself, the whimpering and snarling of the dogs aroused him. Morning came, but for the first time the light of day failed to scatter the wolves. The man waited in vain for them to go. They remained in a circle about him and his fire, displaying an arrogance of possession that shook his courage born of the morning light. He made one desperate attempt to pull out on the trail, but the moment he left the protection of the fire, the boldest wolf leaped for him, but leaped short. He saved himself by springing back, the jaws snapping together a scant 6 inches from his thigh. The rest of the pack was now up and surging upon him, and a throwing of firebrands right and left was necessary to drive them back to a respectful distance. Even in the daylight, he did not dare leave the fire to chop fresh wood. 20 feet away towered a huge dead spruce. He spent half the day extending his campfire to the tree, and at any moment, a half-dozen burning piles of sticks ready at hand to fling at his enemies. Once at the tree, he studied the surrounding forest in order to fell the tree in the direction of the most firewood. The night was a repetition of the night before, save that the need for sleep was becoming overpowering. The snarling of his dogs was losing its efficacy. Besides, they were snarling all the time, and his benumbed and drowsy senses no longer took note of changing pitch and intensity. He awoke with a start. The she-wolf was less than a yard from him. Mechanically, at short range, without letting go of it, he thrust a brand full into her open and snarling mouth. She sprang away, yelling with pain, and while he took delight in the smell of burning flesh and hair, he watched her shaking her head and growling wrathfully a score of feet away. But this time, before he dozed again, he tied a burning pine knot to his right hand. His eyes were closed, but few minutes when the burn of the brand on his flesh awakened him. His eyes were closed, but few minutes when the burn of the flame on his flesh awakened him, yes. For several hours he adhered to this program. Every time he was thus awakened, he drove back the wolves with flying brands, replenished the fire, and rearranged the pine knot on his hand. All worked well, but there came a time when he fastened the pine knot insecurely. As his eyes closed, it fell away from his hand. He dreamed. It seemed to him that he was in Fort McCurry. It was warm and comfortable, and he was playing cribbage with the factor. Also, it seemed to him that the fort was besieged by wolves. They were howling at the very gates, and sometimes he and the factor paused from the game to listen and laugh at the futile efforts of the wolves to get in. And then, so strange was the dream, there was a crash. The door was burst open. He could see the wolves flooding into the big living room of the fort. They were leaping straight for him and the factor. With the bursting open of the door, the noise of their howling had increased tremendously. This howling now bothered him. His dream was merging into something else. He knew not what, but through it all, following him, persisted the howling. And then he awoke to find the howling real. There was a great snarling and yelping. The wolves were rushing him. They were all about him and upon him. The teeth of one had closed upon his arm. Instinctively he leaped into the fire, and as he leaped, he felt the sharp slash of teeth that tore through the flesh of his leg. Then began a firefight. His stout mittens temporarily protected his hands, and he scooped live coals into the air in all directions, until the campfire took on the semblance of a volcano. But it could not last long. His face was blistering in the heat. His eyebrows and lashes were singed off, and the heat was becoming unbearable to his feet. With a flaming brand in each hand, he sprang to the edge of the fire. The wolves had been driven back on every side wherever the live coals had fallen. The snow was sizzling, and every little while a retiring wolf, with wild leap and snort and snarl, announced that one such live coal had been stepped upon. Flinging his brands at the nearest of his enemies, the man thrust his smoldering mittens into the snow and stamped about to cool his feet. His 2 dogs were missing. and he knew well that they had served as a course in the protracted meal which had begun days before with Fatty, and the last course of which would likely be himself in the days to follow. "You ain't got me yet," he cried, savagely shaking his fist at the hungry beasts, and at the sound of his voice the whole circle was agitated. There was a general snarl, and the she-wolf slid up close to him across the snow and watched him with hungry wistfulness. He set to work to carry out a new idea that had come to him. He extended the fire into a large circle. Inside this circle he crouched, his sleeping outfit under him as a protection against the melting snow. When he had thus disappeared within his shelter of flame, the whole pack came curiously to the rim of the fire to see what had become of him. Hitherto they had been denied access to the fire, and they now settled down in a close-drawn circle, like so many dogs, blinking and yawning and stretching their lean bodies in the unaccustomed warmth. Then the she-wolf sat down, pointed her nose at a star, and began to howl. One by one the wolves joined her, till the whole pack, on haunches, with noses pointed skyward, was howling its hunger cry. Dawn came, and daylight. The fire was burning low, the fuel had run out, and there was need to get more. The man attempted to step out of his circle of flame, but the wolves surged to meet him. Burning brands made them spring aside, but they no longer sprang back. In vain he strove to drive them back, as he gave up and stumbled inside his circle. A wolf leapt for him, missed, and landed with all 4 feet in the coals. It cried out with terror, at the same time snarling, and scrambled back to cool its paws in the snow. The man sat down on his blankets in a crouching position. His body leaned forward from the hips, his shoulders relaxed and drooping, and his head on his knees advertised that he had given up the struggle. Now and again he raised his head to note the dying down of the fire. The circle of flame, the coals, was breaking into segments, with openings in between. These openings grew in size, the segments diminished. "I guess you can come and get me anytime," he mumbled. "Anyway, I'm going to sleep." Once he awakened, and in the opening of the circle directly in front of him, he saw the she-wolf gazing at him. Again he awakened a little later, though it seemed hours to him. A mysterious change had taken place, so mysterious a change that he was shocked, wider awake. Something had happened. He could not understand at first, then he discovered it. The wolves were gone. Remained only the trampled snow to show how closely they had pressed him. Sleep was welling up and gripping him again. His head was sinking down upon his knees when he roused with a sudden start. There were cries of men, and churn of sleds, and the creaking of harnesses, and the eager whimpering of straining dogs. 4 sleds pulled in front of the riverbed to the camp among the trees. Half a dozen men were about the man who crouched in the center of the dying fire. They were shaking and prodding him into consciousness. He looked at them like a drunken man and maundered into strange, sleepy speech. Interesting word. Maundered. Red she-wolf. Come in with the dogs at feeding time. First she ate the dog food. Then she ate the dogs. And after that she ate Bill. Oh, hello, Neff. Thank you for the lurk, friend. I hope your stream went well tonight. Where's Lord Alfred? One of the men bellowed into his ear, shaking him roughly. He shook his head slowly. No, she didn't eat him. He's roosting in a tree at the last camp. Dead? The man shouted. And in a box, Henry answered. He jerked his shoulder petulantly away from the grip of his questioner. Say, you let me alone. I'm just plump tuckered out. Good night, everybody. His eyes fluttered and went shut. His chin fell forward on his chest, and even as they eased him down upon the blankets, his snores were rising on the frosty air. But there was another sound. Far and faint it was. In the remote distance, the cry of the hungry wolf pack as it took the trail of another meat than the man it had just missed. Hungry buggers. Part 2. Chapter 1. The Battle of the Fangs. It was the she-wolf who had first caught the sound of men's voices and the whining of the sled dogs, and it was the she-wolf who was first to spring away from the cornered man in his circle of dying flame. The pack had been loath to forego the kill it had hunted down, and it lingered for several minutes, making sure of the sounds, and then it too sprang away on the trail made by the she-wolf. Running at the forefront of the pack was a large gray wolf, one of its several leaders. It was he who directed the pack's course on the heels of the she-wolf. It was he who snarled warningly at the younger members of the pack or slashed at them with his fangs when when they ambitiously tried to pass him. And it was he who increased the pace when he sighted the she-wolf, now trotting slowly across the snow. She dropped in alongside by him, and though it were her appointed position and took the place of the pack, he did not snarl at her, nor show his teeth. When any leap of hers chanced to put her in advance of him. Sorry, that was the whole sentence. On the contrary, he seemed kindly disposed toward her, too kindly to suit her, for he was prone to run near to her, and when he ran too near, it was she who snarled and showed her teeth. Nor was she above slashing his shoulder sharply on occasion. At such times he betrayed no anger. He merely sprang to the side and ran stiffly ahead for several awkward leaps in carriage and conduct, resembling an abashed country swine. Sawayan. This was his one trouble in the running of the pack, but she had other troubles. On her other side ran a gaunt old wolf, grizzled and marked with the scars of many battles. He ran always on her right side. The fact that he had but one eye, and that the left eye might account for this, he also was addicted to crowding her, to veering toward her till his scarred muzzle touched her body or shoulder or neck. As with the running mate on the left, she repelled these attentions with her teeth, but when both bestowed her their attentions at the same time, she was roughly jostled, being compelled with quick snaps to either side, to drive both lovers away and at the same time to maintain her forward leap with the pack and see the way of her feet before her. At such times, her running mates flashed their teeth and growled threateningly across at each other. They might have fought but even wooing and its rivalry waited upon the more pressing hunger need of the pack. After each repulse, when the old wolf sheered abruptly away from the sharp-toothed object of its desire, he shouldered against a young three-year-old that ran on his blind right side. This young wolf had attained his full size, and, considering the weak and famished condition of the pack, he possessed more than the average vigor and spirit. Nevertheless, he ran with his head even with the shoulder of his one-eyed elder. Okay. I don't understand that sentence. I assume it has something along the lines of, he ran at the front of his pack. Perhaps. When he ventured to run abreast of the older wolf, which was seldom. A snarl and a snap sent him back, even with the shoulder again. Oh, his head is even with the old man's shoulder. Okay. They're flying in formation, I suppose. Sometimes, however, he dropped cautiously and slowly behind and edged in between the old leader and the she-wolf. This was a doubly resented, even triply resented. When she snarled her displeasure, the old leader would whirl on the 3-year-old. Sometimes she whirled with him, and sometimes the young leader on the left whirled too. At such times, confronted by 3 sets of savage teeth, the young wolf stopped precipitately, throwing himself back on his haunches, with forelegs stiff, mouth menacing, and mane bristling. This confusion in the front of the moving pack always caused confusion in the rear. The wolves behind collided with the young wolf and expressed their displeasure by administering sharp nips on his hind legs and flanks. He was laying up trouble for himself. For lack of food and short tempers went together, but with the boundless faith of youth he persisted in repeating the maneuver every little while, though it never succeeded in gaining anything for him but discomfiture. Had there been food, love-making and fighting would have gone on apace, and the pack formation would have been broken up. But the situation of the pack was desperate. It was lean with long-standing hunger. It ran below its ordinary speed. At the rear limped the weak members, the very young and the very old. At the front were the strongest, yet all were more like skeletons than full-bodied wolves. Nevertheless, with the exception of the ones that limped, the movements of the animals were effortless and tireless. Their stringy muscles seemed founts of inexhaustible energy. Behind every steel-like contraction of a muscle lay another steel-like contraction, and another, apparently without end. They ran many miles that day. They ran through the night, and the next day found them still running. They were running over the surface of a world frozen and dead. No life stirred. They alone moved through the vast inertness. They alone were alive, and they sought for other things that were alive in order that they might devour them and continue to live. They crossed low divides and ranged a dozen small streams in a low-lying country before their quest was rewarded. Then they came upon moose. It was a big bull they found first. Here was meat and life, and it was guarded by no mysterious fires or flying missiles of flame. Splayed hooves and palmlet antlers they knew, and they flung their customary patience and caution to the wind. It was a brief fight and fierce. The big bull was beset on every side. He ripped them open or split their skulls with shrewdly driven blows of his great hooves. He crushed them and broke them on his large horns. He stamped them into the snow under him in the wallowing struggle. But he was foredoomed, and he went down with the she-wolf tearing savagely at his throat, and with her other teeth fixed everywhere upon him, devouring him alive before ever his last struggles ceased or his last damage had been wrought. There was food in plenty. The bull weighed over 800 pounds, fully 20 pounds of meat per mouth for the 40-odd wolves of the pack. But if they could fast prodigiously, they could feed prodigiously, and soon a few scattered bones were all that remained of the splendid live brute that had faced the pack a few hours before. There was now much resting and sleeping. With full stomachs, bickering and quarreling began among the younger males, and this continued through the few days that followed before the breaking up of the pack. The famine was over. The wolves were now in the country of game, and though they still hunted in pack, they hunted more cautiously, cutting out heavy cows or crippled old bulls from the small moose herds that they ran across. There came a day in this land of plenty when the wolf pack split in half and went in different directions. The she-wolf, the young leader on her left, and the one-eyed elder on her right, led their half of the pack down to the Mackenzie River and across into the lake country to the east. Each day this remnant of the pack dwindled. 2 by 2, male and female, the wolves were deserting. Oh, they're dating and moving off. Occasionally, a solitary male was driven out by the sharp teeth of his rivals. In the end, there remained only 4. The she-wolf, the young leader, the one-eyed one, and the ambitious 3-year-old. The she-wolf had by now developed a ferocious temper. Her 3 suitors all bore the marks of her teeth, yet they never replied in kind, never defended themselves against her. They turned their shoulders to her most savage slashes, and with wagging tails and mincing steps strove to placate her wrath. But if they were all mildness toward her, they were all fierceness toward one another. The 3-year-old grew too ambitious in his fierceness. He caught the one-eyed elder on his blind side and ripped his ear into ribbons. Though the grizzled old fellow could only see on one side, against the youth and vigor of the older he brought into play the wisdom of long years of experience. His lost eye and his scarred muzzle bore evidence to the nature of his experience. He had survived too many battles to be in doubt for a moment about what to do. The battle began fairly, but it did not end fairly. There was no telling what the outcome would have been, for the 3rd wolf joined the elder, and together, the leader and the young leader, they attacked the ambitious 3-year-old to proceeded to destroy him. He was beset on either side by the merciless fangs of his erstwhile comrades. Forgotten were the days they had hunted together, the game they had pulled down, the famine they had suffered. That business was a thing of the past. The business of love was at hand, ever a sterner and crueler business than that of food getting. And in the meanwhile, the she-wolf, the cause of it all, sat down contentedly on her haunches and watched. She was even pleased. This was her day, and it came not often when manes bristled and fang smote fang, or ripped and tore the yielding flesh for all for the possession of her. And in the business of love, the 3-year-old, who had made this his first adventure upon it, yielded up his life. On either side of his body stood his 2 rivals. They were gazing at the she-wolf, who sat smiling in the snow. But the elder leader was wise, very wise, in love even as in battle. The younger leader turned his head to lick a wound on his shoulder. The curve of his neck was turned toward his rival. With his one eye, the elder saw the opportunity. He darted in low and closed with his fangs. It was a long, ripping slash, and deep as well. His teeth, in passing, burst the wall of the great vein of the throat. Then he leaped clear. The young leader snarled terribly, but his snarl broke midmost into a tickling cough. Bleeding and coughing, already stricken, he sprang at the elder and fought while life faded from him, his legs going weak beneath him, the light of day dulling on his eyes, his blows and springs falling shorter and shorter. All the while the she-wolf sat on her haunches and smiled. She was made glad in vague ways by the battle, for this was the love-making of the wild, the sex tragedy of the natural world, that was tragedy only to those that died. To those that survived, it was not tragedy, but realization and achievement. When the young leader lay in the snow and moved no more, One Eye stalked over to the she-wolf. His carriage was one of mingled triumph and caution. He was plainly expectant of a rebuff, and he was just as plainly surprised when her teeth did not flash out at him in anger. For the first time she met him with a kindly manner. She sniffed noses with him, and he even condescended to leap about and frisk and play with him in quite puppyish fashion. And he, for all his grey years and sage experience, behaved quite as puppishly and even a little more foolishly. Forgotten already were the vanquished rivals and the loved tale red written on the snow. Forgotten save once when old Red Eye stopped for a moment to lick his stiffening wounds. Then it was that his lips half writhed into a snarl, and the hair of his neck and shoulders involuntarily bristled. While he half crouched for a spring, his claws spasmodically clutched into the snow surface for firmer footing. But it was all forgotten the next moment, as he sprang after the she-wolf who was coyly leading him a chase through the woods. After that they ran side by side, like good friends who have come to an understanding. The days passed by and they kept together, hunting their meat and killing and eating it in common. After a time the she-wolf began to grow restless. She seemed to be searching for something that she could not find. The hollows under the fallen trees seemed to attract her, and she spent much time nosing about among the larger snow-piled crevices in the rocks and in the caves of overhanging banks. Old One-Eye was not interested at all, but he followed her good-naturedly in her quest, and when her investigations in particular places were unusually protracted, he would lie down and wait until she was ready to go on. They did not remain in one place, but traveled across the country until they regained the Mackenzie River, down which they slowly went, leaving it often to hunt game along the smaller streams that entered it, but always returning to it again. Sometimes they chanced upon other wolves, usually in pairs, but there was no friendliness of intercourse displayed on either side, no gladness at meeting, no desire to return to the pack formation. Several times they encountered solitary wolves. These were always males, and they were pressingly insistent on joining with One-Eye and his mate. This he resented, and when she stood shoulder to shoulder with him, bristling and showing her teeth, the aspiring solitary ones would back off, turn tail, and continue on their lonely way. One moonlit night, running through the quiet forest, One-Eye suddenly halted. His muzzle went up, his tail stiffened, and his nostrils dilated as he scented the air. One foot also he held up, after the manner of a dog. He was not satisfied, and he continued to smell the air, striving to understand the message borne upon it to him. One careless sniff had satisfied his mate, and she trotted on to reassure him. Though he followed her, he was still dubious. He could not forbear an occasional halt in order to more carefully study the warning. She crept out cautiously on the edge of a large open space in the midst of the trees. For some time she stood alone. Then One-Eye, creeping and crawling, every sense on the alert, every hair radiating infinite suspicion, joined her. They stood side by side, watching and listening and smelling. To their ears came the sounds of dogs wrangling and scuffling, the guttural cries of men, the sharper voices of scolding women, and once the shrill and plaintive cry of a child. With the exception of the huge bulks of the skin lodges, little could be seen save the flames of the fire, broken by the movements of intervening bodies and the smoke rising slowly on the quiet air. But to their nostrils came the myriad smells of a Native American camp, carrying a story that was largely incomprehensible to One-Eye, but every detail of which the she-wolf knew. She was strangely stirred, and sniffed with an increasing delight, but old One-Eye was doubtful. He betrayed his apprehension and started tentatively to go. She turned and touched his neck with her muzzle in a reassuring way, then regarded the camp again. A new wistfulness was in her face, but it was not the wistfulness of hunger. She was thrilling to a desire that urged her to go forward, to be in closer to that fire, to be squabbling with the dogs, and to be avoiding and dodging the stumbling feet of men. One-Eye moved impatiently beside her. Her unrest came back upon her, and she knew again her pressing need to find the thing for which she searched. She searched. It's like part of a tongue twister. She turned and trotted back into the forest, to the great relief of One-Eye, who trotted a little to the fore until they were well within the shelter of the trees. As they slid along, noiseless as shadows in the moonlight that came upon a runway, both noses went down to the footprints in the snow. These footprints were very fresh. One-Eye ran ahead cautiously, his mate at his heels. The broad pads of their feet were spread wide in contact with the snow were like velvet. One-Eye caught sight of a dim movement of white in the midst of the white. Okay, it's a whiteout. His sliding gait had been deceptively swift, but it was as nothing to the speed at which he now ran. Before him was bounding the faint patch of white which he had discovered. Oh, perhaps a rabbit. They were running along a narrow alley flanked on either side by the growth of young spruce. Through the trees, the mouth of the alley could be seen, opening out on a moonlit glade. Old One-Eye was rapidly overhauling the fleeing shape of white. Bound by bound he gained. Now he was upon it. One leap more and his teeth would be sinking into it, but that leap was never made. High in the air and straight up soared the white shape, now a struggling snowshoe rabbit that leaped and bounded and executing a fantastic dance there above him in the air and never once returning to earth. It's a hell of a jump. One-Eye sprang back with a snort of sudden fright, then shrank down to the snow and crouched, snarling threats at this thing of fear he did not understand. But the she-wolf coolly thrust past him. She poised for a moment, then sprang for the dancing rabbit. She too soared high, but not so high as the quarry, and her teeth clipped emptily together with a metallic snap. She made another leap, and another. Her mate had slowly relaxed from his crouch and was watching her. He now evinced displeasure at her repeated failures, and himself made a mighty spring upward. His teeth closed upon the rabbit, and he bore it back to the earth with him. But at the same time, there was a suspicious crackling movement beside him, and his astonished eyes saw a young spruce sapling bending down above him to strike him. His jaws let go of their grip, and he leaped backward to escape the strange danger. His lips drawn back from his fangs, his throat snarling, every hair bristled with rage and fright. And in that moment the sapling reared its slender length upright, and the rabbit soared dancing in the air again. The she-wolf was angry. She sank her fangs into her mate's shoulder in reproof, and he, frightened, unaware of what constituted this new onslaught, struck back ferociously and in still greater fright, ripping down the side of the she-wolf's muzzle. For him to resent such reproof was equally unexpected to her, and she sprang upon him in a snarling indignation. Then he discovered his mistake and tried to placate her. But she proceeded to punish him roundly until he gave over all attempts at placation and whirled in a circle, his head away from her, his shoulders receiving the punishment of her teeth. In the meantime, the rabbit danced above them in the air. The she-wolf sat down in the snow, and old One-Eye, now more in fear of his mate than of the mysterious sapling, again sprang for the rabbit. As he sank back with it between his teeth, he kept his eye on the sapling. As before, it followed him back to earth. He crouched down under the impending blow, his hair bristling, but his teeth still keeping tight hold of the rabbit. But the blow did not fall. The sapling remained bent above him. When he moved, it moved, and he growled at it through his clenched jaws. When he remained still, it remained still, and he concluded it was safer to continue remaining still. Yet the warm blood of the rabbit tasted good in his mouth. This reminds me of Gwen. Sometimes in the kitchen she'll look up and she'll see the fan. We have a fan. We don't turn it on because it terrifies the ever-living daylights out of her whenever it moves. But still, whenever she notices it, whenever she's crawling through the kitchen, she just gives it that like, I don't trust you look, and moves away quietly and carefully. It's kind of amusing. It was his mate who relieved him from the quandary in which he found himself. She took the rabbit from him, and while the sapling swayed and teetered threateningly above her, she calmly gnawed off the rabbit's head. At once the sapling shot up, and after that gave no more trouble, remaining in the decorous and perpendicular position in which nature had intended it to grow. Then, between them, the she-wolf and One-Eye devoured the game which the mysterious sapling had caught for them. There were other runways and alleys where rabbits were hanging in the air, and the wolf pair prospected them all, the she-wolf leading the way, old One-Eye following and observant, learning the method of robbing snares, a knowledge destined to stand him in good stead in the days to come. Yeah, I'm sure you'll do real well with that, friend. All right, we're going to run our ads. As we're coming up with those in a couple minutes, so we'll get them out of the way, and we will be right back. Okay, we're back. Just let me check on a thing, if you please. Right. Sorry, just looking through something quickly. There's a lot of people streaming tonight. Quite a few people, in fact. Number of tabs is amazing. Oh, let's see. We are just starting. Chapter 2, The Lair. For 2 days, the she-wolf and One-Eye hung about the Indian camp. The First Nations camp. He was worried and apprehensive, yet the camp lured his mate, and she was loath to depart. But when, one morning, the air was rent with the report of a rifle close at hand, and a bullet smashed against a tree trunk several inches from One-Eye's head, they hesitated no more, but went off on a long, swinging lope that put quick miles between them and the danger. They did not go far, a couple days' journey. The she-wolf's need to find the thing for which she searched had now become imperative. She was getting very heavy and could run but slowly. Once, in the pursuit of a rabbit which she ordinarily would have caught with ease, she gave over and lay down and rested. One-Eye came to her, but when he touched her neck gently with his muzzle, she snapped at him with such quick fierceness that he tumbled over backward and cut a ridiculous figure in his effort to escape her teeth. Her temper was now shorter than ever, but he had become more patient than ever, and more solicitous. And when she found the thing for which she sought, it was a few miles up a small stream that in the summertime flowed into the Mackenzie, but that was frozen over and frozen down to its rocky bottom, a dead stream of solid white from source to mouth. The she-wolf was trotting wearily along, her mate well in advance. When she came upon the overhanging, high clay bank, she turned aside and trotted over to it. The wear and tear of spring storms and melting snows had underwashed the bank, and in one place had made a small cave out of a narrow fissure. She paused at the mouth of the cave and looked the wall over carefully. Then, on one side and then the other, she ran along the base of the wall to where its abrupt bulk merged from the softer lined landscape. Returning to the cave, she entered its narrow mouth. For 3 short feet, she was compelled to crouch. Then the walls widened and rose higher in a little round chamber nearly 6 feet in diameter. The roof barely cleared her head. It was dry and cozy. She inspected it with painstaking care, while One-Eye, who had returned, stood in the entrance and patiently watched her. She dropped her head with her nose to the ground and directed toward a point near her to closely bunched feet. And around this point, she circled several times. Then, with a tired sigh that was almost a grunt, she curled her body in, relaxed her legs, and dropped down, her head toward the entrance. One Eye, with pointed, interested ears, laughed at her, and beyond, outlined against the white light, she could see the brush of his tail waving good-naturedly. Her own ears, with a struggling movement, laid their sharp points backward and down against her head for a moment, while her mouth opened and her tongue lolled peaceably out, and in this way she expressed that she was pleased and satisfied. One Eye was hungry. Though he lay down in the entrance and slept, his sleep was fitful. He kept awakening and cocking his ear at the bright world without, where the April sun was blazing across the snow. When he dozed, upon his ears would steal the faint whispers of hidden trickles of running water, and he would rouse and listen intently. The sun had come back, and all the awakening Northland world was calling to him. Life was stirring. The feel of spring was in the air, the feel of growing life under the snow, of sap ascending in the trees, the buds bursting the shackles of the frost. He cast anxious glances at his mate, but she showed no desire to get up. He looked outside, and half a dozen snowbirds fluttered across his field of vision. He started to get up, then looked back to his mate again, and settled down and dozed. A shrill and minute singing note stole upon his hearing. Once and twice he sleepily brushed his nose with his paw, and then woke up. There, buzzing in the air at the tip of his nose, was a lone mosquito. It was a full-grown mosquito, one that had lain frozen in a dry log all winter, and that now had been thawed out by the sun. He could resist the call of the world no longer. Besides, he was hungry. I don't know that mosquitoes can survive being frozen to death. Yeah, I don't think that's a thing. I think they just didn't know much about mosquito life cycles. Unless someone knows better, as far as I know, mosquitoes don't survive being frozen for the winter. I think their eggs survive the winter, not them. Some do overwinter. Well, there you go. I guess some insects do. I guess they gotta have to. He crawled over to his mate and tried to persuade her to get up, but she only snarled at him, and he walked out alone into the bright sunshine to find the snow surface soft underfoot and the traveling difficult. He went up the frozen bed of the stream, where the snow, shaded by the trees, was yet hard and crystalline. He was gone 8 hours, and he came back through the darkness hungrier than when he had started. He had found game, but he had not caught it. He had broken through the melting snow crust and wallowed, while the snowshoe rabbits had skimmed along on top lightly as ever. He paused at the mouth of the cave with a sudden shock of suspicion. Faint, strange sounds came from within. They were sounds not made by his mate, and yet they were remotely familiar. He bellied cautiously inside and was met by a warning snarl from the she-wolf. This he received without perturbation, though he obeyed it by keeping his distance. But he remained interested in the other sounds, faint, muffled sobbings and slubberings. His mate warned him irritably away, and he curled up and slept in the entrance. When the morning came and a dim light pervaded the lair, he again sought after the source of the remotely familiar sounds. There was a new note in his mate's warning snarl. It was a jealous note, and he was very careful in keeping a respectful distance. Nevertheless, he made out, sheltering between her legs against the length of her body, 5 strange little bundles of life, very feeble, very helpless, making tiny whimpering noises, with eyes that did not open to the light. He was surprised. It was not the first time in his long and successful life that this thing had happened. It had happened many times, yet each time it was as fresh a surprise as ever to him. His mate looked at him anxiously. Every little while she emitted a low growl, and at times, when it seemed to her he approached too near, the growl shot up in her throat to a sharp snarl. Of her own experience, she had no memory of the thing happening. But in her instinct, which was the experience of all the mothers of wolves, there lurked a memory of fathers that had eaten their newborn and helpless progeny. It manifested itself as a fear strong within her that made her prevent One-Eye from more closely inspecting the cubs he had fathered. But there was no danger. Old One-Eye was feeling the urge of an impulse. He was, in turn, an instinct that had come down to him from the fathers of wolves. He did not question it, nor puzzle over it. There was in the fiber of his being, and it was the most natural thing in the world that he should obey it by turning his back on his newborn family, and by trotting out and away on the meat trail whereby he lived. 5 or 6 miles from the lair, the stream divided, its forks going off among the mountains at a right angle. Here, leading up the left fork, he came upon a fresh track. He smelled it, and found it so recent that he crouched swiftly, and looked in the direction in which it disappeared. And he turned deliberately, and took the right fork. The footprint was much larger than the one of his own feet, and he knew that in the wake of such a trail there was little meat for him. Smart fellow. Oh, hello, Bunny. How are you? I see. Hydrate, head pat, and sit up. Demanding. Jeez. All right, there we go. Thank you for the head pat. I sitted it up and right. Yeah, you are very demanding, Bunny. Are you hearing what we're reading? We are wolves. We are hunting bunnies. You had better be careful. Yes. Thank you for the hydrate. Were you streaming? I thought you were streaming. I am suspicious. Did you finish stream? You're a bunny protect, bunny love. Yesterday. Oh, it was yesterday. Sorry, there are so many tabs open right now with streamers all over the frickin' place. It's a busy Monday night. That's for sure. All right. Well, I hope you're doing well tonight. Half a mile up the right fork, his quick ears caught the sound of gnawing teeth. He stalked the quarry and found it to be a porcupine, standing upright against a tree and trying his teeth on the bark. One-Eye approached carefully but hopelessly. He knew the breed, though he had never met it so far north before, and never in his long life had porcupine served him for a meal. But he had long since learned that there was such a thing as chance or opportunity, and he continued to draw near. There was never any telling what might happen, for with live things, events were somehow always happening differently. I got a tickle in my throat now, sorry. Always happening differently. The porcupine rolled itself into a ball, radiating long, sharp needles in all directions that defied attack. In his youth, One-Eye had once sniffed too near a similar, apparently inert ball of quills and had the tail flick out suddenly in his face. One quill he had carried away in his muzzle, where it had remained for weeks, a rankling flame until it finally worked out. So he lay down, in a comfortable crouching position, his nose fully a foot away and out of the line of the tail. Thus he waited, keeping perfectly quiet. There was no telling. Something might happen. The porcupine might unroll. There might be opportunity for a deft or ripping thrust of paw into the tender, unguarded belly. But at the end of half an hour he arose, growled wrathfully at the motionless ball, and trotted on. He had waited too often and futilely in the past for porcupines to unroll, to waste any more time. He continued up the right fork. The day wore along, and nothing rewarded his hunt. The urge of his awakened instinct of fatherhood was strong upon him. He must find meat. In the afternoon he blundered upon, oh dear, what's a ptarmigan? A ptarmigan, maybe the P is silent. I hate when people put a silent P at the beginning of a word. It confuses me and makes me scared. He came out of a thicket and found himself face to face with the slow-witted bird. It was sitting on a log, not a foot beyond the end of his nose. Each saw the other. The bird made a startled rise, but he struck it with his paw and smashed it down to earth, then pounced upon it and caught it in his teeth as it scuttled across the snow, trying to rise into the air again. It's a grouse-like bird. It's a dead-like bird. As his teeth crunched through the tender flesh and fragile bones, he began naturally to eat. Then he remembered, and, turning on the backtrack, started for home, carrying the ptarmigan in his mouth. I've decided the P is silent. A mile above the forks, running velvet-footed, was his custom, a gliding shadow that cautiously prospected each new vista of the trail. He came upon later imprints of the large tracks that he had discovered in the early morning. As the track led his way, he followed, prepared to meet the maker of it at every turn of the stream. He slid his head around a corner of rock where it began an unusually large bend in the stream, and his quick eyes made out something that sent him crouching swiftly down. It was the maker of the track, a large female lynx. She was crouching as he had crouched once that day, in front of her the tight-rolled ball of quills. If he had been a gliding shadow before, he now became the ghost of such a shadow, as he crept and circled around and came up well to leeward of the silent, motionless pair. He lay down in the snow, depositing the ptarmigan beside him, and with eyes peering through the needles of the low-growing spruce, he watched the play of life before him. The waiting lynx and the waiting porcupine, each intent on life, and such was the curiousness of the game. The way of life for one lay in the eating of the other, and the way of life for the other lay in being not eaten. While old One-Eye the wolf, crouching in the covert, played his part too in the game, waiting for some strange freak of chance that might help him on the meat trail, which was his way of life. Half an hour passed. An hour. Nothing happened. The ball of quills might have been a stone for all it moved. The lynx might have been frozen to marble, and to old One-Eye might have been dead. Yet all three animals were keyed to a tenseness of living that was almost painful, and scarcely ever would it come to them to be more alive than they were in their seeming petrification. One-Eye moved slightly and peered forth with increasing eagerness. Something was happening. The porcupine had at last decided that its enemy had gone away. Slowly, cautiously, it was unrolling its ball of impregnable armor. It was agitated by no tremor of anticipation. Slowly, the bristling ball straightened out and lengthened. One-Eye, watching, felt a sudden moistness in his mouth and the drooling of saliva, involuntary, excited by the living meat that was spreading itself like a repast before him. Not quite entirely had the porcupine unrolled when it discovered its enemy. In that instant, the lynx struck. The blow was like a flash of light. The paw, with rigid claws curved like talons, shot under the tender belly and came back with a swift ripping movement. Had the porcupine been entirely unrolled, or had it not discovered its enemy a fraction of a second before the blow was struck, the paw would have escaped unscathed, but the side flick of the tail sank sharp quills into its, into it as it was drawn. Sorry, I got I'm very full from dinner still. We had a slightly larger than normal dinner, and right before stream too. Everything had happened at once. The blow, the counter blow, the squeal of agony from the porcupine, the big cat's squall of sudden hurt and astonishment. One eye half arose in his excitement, his ears up, his tail straight out and quivering behind him. The lynx's bad temper got the best of her. She sprang savagely at the thing that had hurt her, but the porcupine, squealing and grunting, with disrupted anatomy trying feebly to roll up into its ball of protection, flicked out its tail again. And again the big cat squalled with hurt and astonishment. Then she fell to backing away and sneezing, her nose bristling with quills like a monstrous pincushion. She brushed her nose with her paws, trying to dislodge the fiery darts, thrust it into the snow, and rubbed it against twigs and branches, and all the time leaping about, ahead, sideways, up and down, in a frenzy of pain and fright. She sneezed continually, and her stub of a tail was doing its best toward lashing about by giving quick, violent jerks. Poor kitty cat. She quit her antics and quieted down for a long minute. When I watched, and even he could not repress a start and an involuntary bristling of hair along his back when she suddenly leaped without warning straight up into the air, at the same time emitting a long and most terrible squall. Then she sprang away, up the trail, squalling with every leap she made. It was not until her racket had faded away in the distance and died out that One Eye ventured forth. He walked as delicately as though all the snow were carpeted with porcupine quills, erect and ready to pierce the soft pads of his feet. The porcupine met his approach with a furious squealing and clashing of its long teeth. It had managed to roll up into a ball again, but it was not quite the old compact ball. Its muscles were too much torn for that. It had been ripped almost in half, and was still bleeding profusely. One Eye scooped the mouthfuls of blood-soaked snow, and chewed and tasted and swallowed. This served as a relish, and his hunger increased mightily, but he was too old in the world to forget his caution. He waited. He lay down and waited, while the porcupine grated its teeth and uttered grunts and sobs and occasional sharp little squeals. In a little while, One Eye noticed that the quills were drooping, and that a great quivering had set up. The quivering came to an end suddenly. There was a final defiant clash of the long teeth, then all the quills drooped quite down, and the body relaxed and moved no more. With a nervous, shrinking paw, One Eye stretched out the porcupine to its full length, and turned it over on its back. Nothing had happened. It was surely dead. He studied it intently for a moment, then took a careful grip with his teeth and started off down the stream, partly carrying, partly dragging the porcupine, with head turned to the side so as to avoid stepping on the prickly mass. He recollected something, dropped the burden, and trotted back to where he had left the ptarmigan. He did not hesitate a moment. He knew clearly what was to be done, and this he did by promptly eating the ptarmigan. He then returned and took up his burden. We can't leave a meal behind, I suppose. When he dragged the result of his day's hunt into the cave, the she-wolf inspected it, turned her muzzle to him, and lightly licked him on the neck. But the next instant, she was warning him away from the cubs with a snarl that was less harsh than usual, and was more apologetic than menacing. Her instinctive fear of the father of her progeny was toning down. He was behaving as a wolf father should, and manifesting no unholy desire to devour the young lives she had brought into the world. All right. Chapter 3, The Grey Cub. He was different from his brothers and sisters. Their hair already betrayed the reddish hue inherited from their mother, the she-wolf, while he alone, in this particular, took after his father. He was the one little grey cub of the litter. He had bred true to the straight wolf stock. In fact, he had bred true to old One-Eye himself, physically, but with a single exception. That was he had 2 eyes to his father's one. Well, of course, you don't lose an eye, and it doesn't make a copy in the genetic code. Hello, Queen. When you have a mate and 5 pups to feed, yeah. No, you don't. Yeah, don't skip a meal there. 30 stream streak. Thank you very much, Queen. When you get to 100, do you also want hot meat as well? Like, this is what Valana wants. She hit 100 streams today, so apparently she's due. Hello, Clue. I'll make it a tradition. Anyone who gets to 100 streaks, I'll send you hot meat. Well, if you have to make the meat hot yourself, that's the details. Whatever, the minor. What am I talking about? Hot, juicy meat for Sid before I get the hot meat. Okay, Clue just got disqualified. I think that's what that means. Yeah. Oh, you guys have you have a NASA Artemis 2 thingy? How did you get that? Little icon thingy. That's not fair. It's not fair that you have a NASA icon. So there. You just watched the NASA stream for the hour? Oh, it was an hour? Oh, I think I must have missed that. We're waiting for the actual moon landing. Then we're going to spend time looking at a screen, not change or do anything. Mm-hmm. And what's this NASA Sparkle? Oh, that's very cute. I want to see them buy the rights to Sailor Moon for all the merchandise. Mm-hmm. It's really interesting. The 2 times NASA has gone to the moon there have been conflicting priorities, right? Right now, like the group funding NASA have political motivations, which are quite disappointing, but very human, right? The first time it was, hey, we got to beat Russia. This time it's literally, hey, we got to beat China in getting back to the moon. This is the only reason that the government's going, yeah, sure, let's fund this. For NASA, however, the people who work at NASA, as far as I'm aware, have genuine passion for this, for the science and for the achievement, which feels far more noble than we have to beat the other countries there because we won't look good otherwise. Like the hot ones first were named after the goddess sun for some, what, say what? The hot... You like how the first ones are named after I like the hot ones too, actually. Oh, dear God. I like how the first ones are named after the god of the sun for some reason. After the god of the sun. Oh, the first missions. I'm thinking like the first Sailor Scouts were named after planets. What are you talking about? Yeah, Apollo. Yeah. That kind of sounds wrong, doesn't it? Why would it be named after the sun god? Yeah. Anyways, we should get on with the show. On with the story. Oh, let's see. We have a little cub that's taken after Dad. With the exception that his genetic code did not code for one eye just because Dad had an injury. Apollo's Artemis's brother, maybe? Yeah. Greek family trees. I'm suspicious of them. The gray cub's eyes had not been open long, yet already he could see with steady clearness, and while his eyes were still closed, he had felt, tasted, and smelled. He knew his 2 brothers and his 2 sisters very well. He had begun to romp with them in a feeble, awkward way, and even to squabble, his little throat vibrating with a queer rasping noise, the forerunner of the growl. as he worked himself into a passion. And long before his eyes had opened, he had learned by touch, taste, and smell to know his mother, a fount of warmth and liquid food and tenderness. She possessed a gentle, caressing tongue that soothed him when it passed over his soft little body, and that impelled him to snuggle close against her and to doze off to sleep. Most of the first month of his life had been passed thus in sleeping, but now he could see quite well, and he stayed awake for longer periods of time. He was coming to learn his world quite well. His world was gloomy, but he did not know that, for he knew no other world. It was dim-lighted, but his eyes had never had to adjust themselves to any other light. His world was very small. Its limits were the walls of the lair, but as he had no knowledge of the wider world outside, he was never oppressed by the narrow confines of his existence. This is why having indoor cats is okay. And also to poop, Valetta? yeah, okay. Mother to pupper, yeah. Yep, that's right. The tongues induced them to poop. This is correct. But he had early discovered that one wall of his world was different from the rest. This was the mouth of the cave and the source of light. He had discovered that it was different from the other walls long before he had any thoughts of his own, any conscious volitions. It had been an irresistible attraction before ever his eyes opened and looked upon it. The light from it had beat upon his sealed lids, and the eyes and the optic nerves had pulsated to little spark-like flashes, warm-colored and strangely pleasing. The life of his body and of every fiber of his body, and the life that was the very substance of his body, and that was apart from his own personal life, had yearned toward this light and urged his body toward it in the same manner that the cunning chemistry of a plant urges it toward the sun. That was very wordy. Always in the beginning, before his conscious life dawned, he had crawled toward the mouth of the cave, and in this his brothers and sisters were one with him. Never in that period did any of them crawl toward the dark corners of the back wall. The light drew them as if they were plants. The chemistry of the life that composed them demanded the light as a necessity of being, and their little puppet bodies crawled blindly and chemically like the tendrils of a vine. Later on, when each developed individuality and became personally conscious of impulsions and desires, the attraction of the light increased. They were always crawling and sprawling toward it, and being driven back from it by their mother. Oh, the balance of wolflyhood. It was in this way that the gray cub learned other attributes of his mother than the soft, soothing tongue. In his insistent crawling toward the light, he discovered in her nose that with a sharp nudge administered rebuke, and later a paw that crushed him down and rolled him over and over with swift, calculating stroke. Thus he learned hurt, and on top of it he learned to avoid hurt, first by not incurring the risk of it, and second, when he had incurred the risk, by dodging and by retreating. These were conscious actions, and were the results of his first generalizations upon the world. Before that he had recoiled automatically from hurt, as he had crawled automatically toward the light. After that, he recoiled from hurt because he knew that it was hurt. Honestly, there's a lot of speculations going on here, but it's fine. He was a fierce little cub. So were his brothers and sisters, it was to be expected. He was a carnivorous animal. He came of a breed of meat killers and meat eaters. His father and mother lived wholly upon meat. The milk he had sucked with his first flickering life was milk transformed directly from meat. And now, at a month old, when his eyes had been open for about a week, He was beginning himself to eat meat. Meat half digested by the she-wolf and disgorged for the 5 growing cubs that already made too great demand upon her breast. But he was, further, the fiercest of the litter. He could make a louder rasping growl than any of them. His tiny rages were much more terrible than theirs. It was he that first learned the trick of rolling a fellow cub over with a cunning paw stroke. And it was he that first gripped another cub by the ear and pulled and tugged and growled through jaws tight clenched. And certainly it was he that caused the mother the most trouble in keeping her litter from the mouth of the cave. The fascination of the light for the gray cub increased from day to day. He was perpetually departing on yard-long adventures toward the cave's entrance, and as perpetually being driven back. Only he did not know it for an entrance. He did not know anything about entrances, passages whereby one goes from one place to another place. In case the reader didn't know, I suppose. He did not know any other place, much less of a way to get there. So to him, the entrance of the cave was a wall of light. As the sun was to the outside dweller, this wall was to him the sun of his world. It attracted him as a candle attracts a moth. He was always striving to attain it. The life that was so swiftly expanding within him urged him continually toward the wall of light. The life that was within him knew that it was the one way out, the way he was predestined to tread. But he himself did not know anything about it. He did not know he did not know there was anything, so there was any outside at all. Ugh. Yeah. Mouth forms. There was one strange thing about this wall of light. His father, he had already come to recognize his father as the one other dweller in the world, a creature like his mother who slept near the light and was a bringer of meat. His father had a way of walking right into the white far wall and disappearing. The gray cub could not understand this. Though never permitted by his mother to approach that wall, he had approached the other walls and encountered hard obstruction on the end of his tender nose. This hurt, and after several such adventures, he left the walls alone, defeated by barriers. Without thinking about it, he accepted this disappearing into the wall as a peculiarity of his father, as milk and half-digested meat were peculiarities of his mother. In fact, the gray cub was not given to thinking, at least to the kind of thinking customary of men. His brain worked in dim ways, yet his conclusions were as sharp and distinct as those achieved by men. He had a method of accepting things, without questioning the why and wherefore. In reality, this was the act of classification. He was never disturbed over why a thing happened. How it happened was sufficient for him. Thus, when he had bumped his nose in the back wall a few times, he accepted that he would not disappear into walls. In the same way, he accepted that his father could disappear into walls. But he was not in the least disturbed by desire to find out the reason for the difference between his father and himself. Logic and physics were no part of his mental makeup. Like most creatures of the wild, he early experienced famine. There came a time when not only did the meat supply cease, but the milk no longer came from his mother's breast. At first the cubs whimpered and cried, but for the most part they slept. It was not long before they were reduced to a coma of hunger. There were no more spats and squabbles, no more tiny rages nor attempts at growling, while the adventures toward the far white wall ceased altogether. The cubs slept, while the life that was in them flickered and died down. One Eye was desperate. He ranged far and wide and slept but little in the lair that had now become cheerless and miserable. The she-wolf, too, left her litter and went out in search of meat. In the first days after the birth of the cubs, One Eye had journeyed several times back to the Native American camp and robbed the rabbit snares. But with the melting of snow and the opening of the streams, the Native American camp had moved away, and that source of supply was closed to him. When the gray cub came back to life and again took interest in the far white wall, he found that the population of his world had been reduced. Only one sister remained to him, the rest were gone. As he grew stronger, he found himself compelled to play alone, for the sister no longer lifted her head nor moved about. His little body rounded out with the meat he now ate, but the food had come too late for her. She slept continuously, a tiny skeleton flung around with skin in which the flame flickered lower and lower, and at last went out. Then there came a time when the gray cub no longer saw his father appearing and disappearing in the wall, nor lying down asleep in the entrance. This had happened at the end of the second and less severe famine. The she-wolf knew why One-Eye never came back, but there was no way by which she could tell what she had seen to the gray cub. Hunting herself for meat up the left fork of the stream where lived the lynx, she had followed a day-old trail of One-Eye, and she had found him, or what remained of him at the end of the trail. There were many signs of the battle that had been fought, and of the lynx's withdrawal to her lair after having won the victory. Before she went away, the she-wolf had found his lair, but the signs told her that the lynx was inside, and she had not dared to venture in. After that, the she-wolf in her hunting avoided the left fork, for she knew that in the lynx's lair was a litter of kittens, and she knew the lynx for a fierce, bad-tempered creature and a terrible fighter. It was all very well for half a dozen wolves to drive a lynx spitting and bristling up a tree, but it was quite a different matter for a lone wolf to encounter a lynx, especially when the lynx was known to have her litter of hungry kittens at her back. But the wild is the wild, and motherhood is motherhood. At all times fiercely protective, whether in the wild or out of it, and the time was to come when the she-wolf, for her gray cub's sake, would venture the left fork, and the lair in the rocks, and the lynx's wrath. Chapter 4: The Wall of the World. By the time his mother began leaving the cave on hunting expeditions, the cub had learned well the law that forbade his approaching the entrance. Not only had this law been forcibly and many times impressed on him by his mother's nose and paw, but in him the instinct of fear was developing. Never in his brief cave life had he encountered anything of which to be afraid, yet fear was in him. It had come down to him from the remote ancestry through 1,000 lives. It was a heritage he had received directly from One-Eye and the she-wolf, but to them, in turn, it had been passed down through all the generations of wolves that had gone before. Fear. That legacy of the wild which no animal may escape nor exchange for pottage. So the gray cub knew fear, though he knew not the stuff of which fear was made. Possibly he accepted it as one of the restrictions of life, for he had already learned that there were such restrictions. Hunger he had known, and when he could not appease his hunger he had felt restriction. The hard obstruction of the cave wall, the sharp nudge of his mother's nose, the smashing stroke of her paw, the hunger unappeased of several famines, had borne in upon him all was not freedom in the world, that to life there was limitations and restraints. These limitations and restraints were laws. To be obedient to them was to escape hurt and make for happiness. He did not reason the question out in this man fashion. He merely classified the things that hurt and the things that did not hurt, and after such classification he avoided the things that hurt, the restrictions and restraints, in order to enjoy the satisfactions and the remunerations of life. Thus it was that in obedience to the law laid down by his mother, and in obedience to the law of that unknown and nameless thing, fear, he kept away from the mouth of the cave. It remained to him a white wall of light. When his mother was absent, he slept most of the time, while during the intervals that he was awake, he kept very quiet, suppressing the whimpering cries that tickled in his throat and strove for noise. Once, lying awake, he heard a strange sound in the white wall. He did not know that it was a wolverine standing outside, all a-trembling with its own daring, and cautiously scenting out the contents of the cave. The cub knew only that the sniff was strange, as something unclassified, therefore unknown and terrible. For the unknown was one of the chief elements that went into the making of fear. The hair bristled upon the gray cub's back, but it bristled silently. How was he to know that this thing that sniffed was a thing which to bristle? It was not born of any knowledge of his, yet it was the visible expression of the fear that was in him, and for which, in his own life, there was no accounting. But fear was accompanied by another instinct, that of concealment. The cub was in a frenzy of terror, yet he lay without movement or sound, frozen, petrified into immobility, to all appearances dead. His mother, coming home, growled as she smelt the wolverine's track, and bounded into the cave and licked and nozzled him with undue vehemence of affection. And the cub felt that somehow he had escaped a great hurt. But there were other forces at work in the cub, the greatest of which was growth. Instinct and law demanded of him obedience, but growth demanded disobedience. His mother and fear impelled him to keep away from the white wall. Growth is life, and life is forever destined to make for light. So there was no damming up the tide of life that was rising within him, rising with every mouthful of meat he swallowed, with every breath he drew. In the end, one day, fear and obedience were swept away by the rush of life, and the cub straddled and sprawled toward the entrance. Unlike any other wall with which he had had experience, this wall seemed to recede from him as he approached. No hard surface collided with the tender little nose he thrust out tentatively before him. The substance of the wall seemed as permeable and yielding as light, and as condition in his eyes had the seeming of form. So he entered into what had been wall to him and bathed in the substance that composed it. Hello, yokai. Welcome in, friend. And the wolf is bathing in a wall of light. He's leaving his little cave that he's growing up in. It was bewildering. He was sprawling through solidity, and ever the light grew brighter. Fear urged him to go back, but growth drove him on. Suddenly he found himself at the mouth of the cave, the wall inside which he had thought himself. As suddenly leaped back before him into an immeasurable distance. The light had become painfully bright. He was dazzled by it. Likewise, he was made dizzy by this abrupt and tremendous extension of space. Automatically, his eyes were adjusting themselves to the brightness, focusing themselves to meet the increased distance of objects. At first, the wall had leapt beyond his vision. He now saw it again, but it had taken upon itself a remarkable remoteness. Also, its appearance had changed. It was now a variegated wall, composed of the trees that fringed the stream, the opposing mountain that towered above the trees, and the sky that out-towered the mountain. A great fear came upon him. This was more of the terrible unknown. He crouched down on the lip of the cave and gazed out on the world. He was very much afraid, because it was unknown. It was hostile to him. Therefore the hair stood up on end along his back, and his lips wrinkled weakly in an attempt at a ferocious and intimidating snarl. Out of his puniness and fright, he challenged and menaced the whole wide world. Nothing happened. He continued to gaze, and in his interest he forgot to snarl. Also, he forgot to be afraid, for the time, fear had been routed by growth, while growth had assumed the guise of curiosity. He began to notice near objects, an open portion of the stream that flashed in the sun, the blasted pine tree that stood at the base of the slope, and the slope itself that ran right up to him and ceased 2 feet beneath the lip of the cave on which he crouched. Now the gray cub had lived all his days on a level floor. He had never experienced the hurt of a fall. He did not know what a fall was, so he stepped boldly out upon the air. His hind legs still rested on the cave lip, so he fell forward, head downward. The earth struck him a harsh blow on the nose that made him yelp, and he began rolling down the slope over and over. He was in a panic of terror. The unknown had caught him at last. It had gripped savagely hold of him and was about to wreak upon him some terrific hurt. Growth was now routed by fear, and he keyed. He keyed like any other frightened puppy. K-I-Y-I''D. That's what he did. The unknown bore him on, he knew not to what frightful hurt, and he yelped and keyed unceasingly. This was a different proposition from crouching in frozen fear while the unknown lurked just alongside. Now the unknown had caught tight hold of him. Silence would do no good. Besides, it was not fear, but terror that convulsed him. But the slope grew more gradual, and its base was grass-covered. Here the cub lost momentum. When at last he came to a stop, he gave one last agonized yell and then a long whimpering wail. Also, and quite as a matter of course, as though in his life he had already made 1,000 toilets, he proceeded to lick away the dry clay that soiled him. After that, he sat up and gazed about him, as might the first man of the earth who landed upon Mars. Although he probably didn't tumble down a hill to do that, when we go there. The cub had broken through the wall of the world. The unknown had let go its hold of him, and here he was without hurt. But the first man on Mars would have experienced less unfamiliarity than did he. Without any antecedent. Without any knowledge, without any warning whatever that such existed, he found himself an explorer in a totally new world. Anecdent. It's anecdent, I guess. Antecedent. Without any antecedent, that's what I want to call it. Silly words. Now that the terrible unknown had let go of him, he forgot that the unknown had any terrors. He was aware only of curiosity and all the things about him. He inspected the grass beneath him, the mossberry plant just beyond, and the dead trunk of the blasted pine that stood on the edge of an open space among the trees. A squirrel running around the base of the trunk came full upon him and gave him a great fright. He cowered down and snarled. The squirrel was badly scarred. It ran up the tree and from a point of safety chattered back savagely. This helped the cub's courage. Though the woodpecker he next encountered gave him a start, he proceeded confidently on his way. Such was his confidence, that when a moose bird impudently hopped up to him, he reached out at it with a playful paw. The result was a sharp peck on the end of his nose that made him cower down and kee. The noise he made was too much for the moose bird, who sought safety in flight. But the cub was learning. His misty little mind had already made an unconscious classification. There were live things and things not alive. Also, he must watch out for the live things. The things not alive remained always in one place, but the live things moved about, and there was no telling what they might do. The thing to expect of them was the unexpected, and for this he must be prepared. He traveled very clumsily. He ran into sticks and things. A twig that he thought a long way off would the next instant hit him on the nose or rake along his ribs. There were inequalities of surface. Sometimes he overstepped and stubbed his nose. Quite as often he understepped and stubbed his feet. Then there were the pebbles and stones that turned under him when he trod upon them, and from them came to know that things not alive were not all in the same state of equilibrium as was his cave. Also that small things not alive were more liable than large things to fall down or turn over. But with every mishap he was learning. The longer he walked, the better he walked. He was adjusting himself. He was learning to calculate his own muscular movements, to know his physical limitations, to measure distances between objects and between objects and himself. His was the luck of the beginner. Born to be a hunter of meat, though he did not know it, he blundered upon meat just once outside his own cave door on his first foray into the world. It was by sheer blundering that he chanced upon the shrewdly hidden ptarmigan nest. He fell into it. He had essayed to walk along the trunk of a fallen pine. You know what? This stupid word. Every time I see it, it's like, why are you writing an essay? I just know I'm doing it wrong. Past simple and past particle of essay to try to do something. Okay, that makes sense. It's a verb. It's old-fashioned. Issei. Okay, it's issei. Oh, can I? Essay. Okay, awesome. It's essay. Now we all learned something. Well, I learned something, but yeah, maybe everyone else already knew it. He had essayed to walk along the trunk of a fallen pine. The rotted bark gave way under his feet, and with a despairing yelp he pitched down the rounded crescent, smashed through the leafage and stalks of a small bush, and in the heart of the bush, on the ground, fetched up in the midst of 7 ptarmigan chicks. They made noises, and at first he was frightened of them, and he perceived that they were very little, and he became bolder. They moved. He placed his paw on one, and its movements were accelerated. This was a source of enjoyment to him. He smelled it, picked it up in his mouth. It struggled and tickled his tongue. At the same time, he was made aware of a sensation of hunger. His jaws closed together. There was a crunching of fragile bones, and warm blood ran in his mouth. The taste of it was good. This was meat. The same as his mother gave him, only it was alive and between his teeth, and therefore better. So he ate the ptarmigan. Nor did he stop till he had devoured the whole brood. Then he licked his chops in quite the same way as his mother did, and began to crawl out of the bush. Oh, and we are going to crawl into some ads. Right, 3 minutes, folks. We'll be back shortly after. Okay, and we're back. Let's see. It is such a busy night tonight. Too many people. Alright. Okay, where were we? Alright, it just became... He came crawling out of the bush, right? He encountered a feathered whirlwind. He was confused and blinded by the rush of it and the beat of angry wings. He hid his head between his paws and yelped. The blows increased. The mother ptarmigan was in a fury, and he became angry. He rose up, snarling, striking out with his paws. He sank his tiny teeth into one of the wings and pulled and tugged sturdily. The ptarmigan struggled against him, showering blows upon him with her free wing. It was his first battle. He was elated. He forgot all about the unknown. He no longer was afraid of anything. He was fighting, tearing at a live thing that was striking at him. Also, this live thing was meat. The lust to kill was on him. He had just destroyed little live things. He would now destroy a big live thing. He was too busy and happy to know that he was happy. He was thrilling and exulting in ways new to him and greater to him than any he had known before. He held on to the wing and growled between his tight-clenched teeth. The ptarmigan dragged him out of the bush. When she turned and tried to drag him back into the bush's shelter, he pulled her away from it and on into the open. And all the time she was making outcry and striking with her free wing, while feathers were flying like a snowfall. The pitch to which he was aroused was tremendous. All the fighting blood of his breed was up in him and surging through him. This was living, though he did not know it. He was realizing his own meaning in the world. He was doing that for which he was made, killing meat and battling to kill it. He was justifying his existence, than which life can do no greater. For life achieves its summit when it does to the utmost that which it was equipped to do. The sentences are really kind of somersaulty, kind of in. Perhaps we read worse, but they're definitely doing their best to pad out words. It makes me trip up a little bit sometimes. After a time, the ptarmigan ceased her struggling. He still held her by the wing, and they lay on the ground and looked at each other. He tried to growl threateningly, ferociously. She pecked on his nose, which by now, that of previous adventures, was sore. He winced but held on. She pecked him again and again. From wincing, he went to whimpering. He tried to back away from her, oblivious to the fact that by his hold on her he dragged her after him. A rain of pecks fell on his ill-used nose. The flood of fight ebbed down in him, and, releasing his prey, he turned tail and scampered across the open and inglorious retreat. Across the open in inglorious retreat. He lay down to rest on the other side of the open, near the edge of the bushes, his tongue lolling out, his chest heaving and panting, his nose still hurting him and causing him to continue his whimper. But as he lay there, suddenly there came to him a feeling as of something terrible impending. The unknown with all its terrors rushed upon him, and he shrank back instinctively into the shelter of the bush. As he did so, a draught of air fanned him, and a large winged body swept ominously and silently past. A hawk, driving down out of the blue, had barely missed him. While he lay in the bush, recovering from his fright and peering fearfully out, the mother ptarmigan on the other side of the open space fluttered out of the ravaged nest. It was because of her loss that she paid no attention to the winged bolt of the sky. But the cub saw, and it was a warning and a lesson to him. The swift downward swoop of the hawk, the short skim of its body just above the ground, the strike of its talons in the body of the ptarmigan. The ptarmigan's squawk of agony and fright and the hawks rush upward into the blue, carrying the ptarmigan away with it. This was a long time before the cub left. It was a long time before the cub left its shelter. He had learned much. Live things were meat. They were good to eat. Also, live things, when they were large enough, could give hurt. It was better to eat small live things like ptarmigan chicks, and to let alone large live things like ptarmigan hens. Nevertheless, he felt a little prick of ambition, a sneaking desire to have another battle with that ptarmigan hen. Only the hawk had carried her away. Maybe there were other ptarmigan hens. He would go and see. He came down a shelving bank to the stream. He had never seen water before. The footing looked good. There were no inequalities of surface. He stepped boldly out on it and went down, crying with fear into the embrace of the unknown. It was cold, and he gasped, breathing quickly. The water rushed into his lungs instead of the air that had always accompanied his act of breathing. The suffocation he experienced was like the pang of death. To him, it signified death. He had no conscious knowledge of death, but like every animal of the wild, he possessed the instinct of death. To him, it stood as the greatest of hurts. It was the very essence of the unknown. It was the sum of the terrors of the unknown, the one culminating in unthinkable catastrophe that could happen to him, about which he knew nothing and about which he feared everything. He came to the surface, and the sweet air rushed into his open mouth. He did not go down again, quite as though it had been a long-established custom of his. He struck out with all his legs and began to swim. The near bank was a yard away, but he had come up with his back to it, and the first thing his eyes rested upon was the opposite bank, toward which he immediately began to swim. The stream was a small one, but in the pool it widened out to a score of feet. Midway in the passage, the current picked up the cub and swept him downstream. He was caught in the miniature rapid at the bottom of the pool. Here was little chance for swimming. The quiet water had become suddenly angry. Sometimes he was under, sometimes on top. At all times he was in violent motion, now being turned over or around, and again being smashed against a rock. And with every rock he struck, he yelped. His progress was a series of yelps from which might have been adduced the number of rocks he encountered. Below the rapid was a second pool, and here, captured by the eddy, he was gently borne to the bank, and as gently deposited on a bed of gravel. He crawled frantically clear of the water and lay down. He had learned some more about the world. Water was not alive, yet it moved. Also, it looked as solid as the earth, but was without any solidity at all. His conclusion was that things were not always what they appeared to be. The cub's fear of the unknown was an inherited distrust, and it had now been strengthened by experience. Thenceforth, in the nature of things, he would possess an abiding distrust of appearances. He would have to learn the reality of a thing before he could put his faith into it. One other adventure was destined for him that day. He had recollected that there was a such thing in the world as his mother, and then there came to him a feeling that he wanted her more than all the rest of the things in the world. Not only was his body tired with the adventures he had undergone, but his little brain was equally tired. In all the days he had lived, it had not worked so hard as on this one day. Furthermore, he was sleepy, so he started out to look for the cave and his mother, feeling at the same time an overwhelming rush of loneliness and helplessness. He was sprawling along between some bushes when he heard a sharp, intimidating cry. There was a flash of yellow before his eyes. He saw a weasel leaping swiftly away from him. It was a small live thing, and he had no fear. Then before him, at his feet, he saw an extremely small live thing, only several inches long, a young weasel that, like himself, had disobediently gone out adventuring. It tried to retreat before him. He turned it over with his paw and made a queer grating noise. The next moment, the flash of yellow reappeared before his eyes. He heard again the intimidating cry, and at the same instant received a sharp blow on the side of the neck and felt the sharp teeth of the mother weasel cut into his flesh. While he yelped and keyed and scrambled backward, he saw the mother weasel leap upon her young one and disappear with it into the neighboring thicket. The cut of her teeth in his neck still hurt, but his feelings were hurt more grievously, and he sat down and weakly whimpered. This mother weasel was so small and so savage. He was yet to learn that for size and weight, the weasel was the most ferocious, vindictive, and terrible of all the killers of the wild, but a portion of this knowledge was quickly to be his. He was still whimpering when the mother weasel reappeared. She did not rush him now that her young one was safe. She approached more cautiously, and the cub had full opportunity to observe and learn. Snake-like body, and her head erect, eager, and snake-like itself. Her sharp, menacing cry sent the hair bristling along his back, and he snarled warningly at her. She came closer and closer. There was a leap, swifter than his unpracticed sight, and the lean, yellow body disappeared for a moment out of the field of his vision. The next moment she was at his throat, her teeth buried in his hair and flesh. At first he snarled and tried to fight, but he was very young, and this was only his first day in the world. His snarl became a whimper, his fight a struggle to escape. The weasel never relaxed her hold. She hung on, striving to press down with her teeth to the great vein where his lifeblood bubbled. The weasel was a drinker of blood, and it was ever her preference to drink from the throat of life itself. The gray cub would have died, and there would have been no story to write about him, had not the she-wolf come bounding through the bushes. The weasel let go of the cub and flashed at the she-wolf's throat, missing, but getting a hold of the jaw instead. The she-wolf flirted her head like the snap of a whip, breaking the weasel's hold and flinging it high in the air. And, still in the air, the she-wolf's jaws closed on the lean yellow body, and the weasel knew death between their crunching teeth. The cub experienced another access of affectation on the part of his mother. Her joy at finding him seemed even greater than his joy at being found. She nozzled him and caressed him and licked the cuts made in him by the weasel's teeth. Then, between them, mother and cub, they ate the blood drinker, and after that went back to the cave and slept. Chapter 5. The Law of Meat. I gotta turn this air off. It's a little too cool. The cub's development was rapid. He rested for 2 days and then ventured forth from the cave again. It was on this adventure that he found the young weasel whose mother he had helped eat, and saw to it that the young weasel went the way of its mother. But on this trip, he did not get lost. When he grew tired, he found his way back to the cave and slept, and every day thereafter found him out and ranging a wider area. He began to get accurate measurement of his strength and his weakness, and to know when to be bold and when to be cautious. He found it expedient to be cautious all the time, except for the rare moments when, assured of his own intrepidity, he abandoned himself to petty rages and lusts. He was always a little demon of fury when he chanced upon a stray ptarmigan. Never did he fail to respond savagely to the chatter of the squirrel had he first met on the blasted pine, while the sight of a moose bird almost invariably put him into the wildest of rages, for he never forgot the peck on the nose he had received from the first of that ilk he encountered. But there were times when even a moose bird failed to affect him, and those were the times when he felt himself to be in danger from some other prowling meat hunter. He never forgot the hawk, and its moving shadow always sent him crouching into the nearest thicket. He no longer sprawled and straddled, and he was already developing the gait of his mother, slinking and furtive, apparently without exertion, yet sliding along with a swiftness that was as deceptive as it was imperceptible. In the matter of meat, his luck had been all in the beginning. The 7 ptarmigan chicks and the baby weasel represented the sum of his killings. He desired to kill, strengthened with the days, and he cherished hungry ambitions for the squirrel that was chattering so volubly, and always informed all wild creatures that the wolf cub was approaching. But as birds flew in the air, squirrels could climb trees, and the cub could only try to crawl unobserved upon the squirrel when it was on the ground. The cub entertained a great respect for his mother. She could get meat, and she never failed to bring him his share. Further, she was unafraid of things. It did not occur to him that this fearlessness was founded upon experience and knowledge. Its effect on him was that of an impression of power. His mother represented power, and as he grew older he felt his power in the sharper admonishment of her paw, while the reproving nudge of her nose gave place to the slash of her fangs. For this, likewise, he respected his mother. She compelled obedience from him, and the older he grew, the shorter grew her temper. Famine came again, and the cub, with clearer consciousness, knew once more the bite of hunger. The she-wolf ran herself thin in the quest for meat. She rarely slept any more in the cave, spending most of her time on the meat trail and spending it vainly. This famine was not a long one, but it was severe while it lasted. The cub found no more milk in his mother's breast, nor did he get one mouthful of meat for himself. Before, he had hunted in play for the sheer joyousness of it. Now he hunted in deadly earnest and found nothing. Yet the failure of it accelerated his development. He studied the habits of the squirrel with greater carefulness and strove with greater craft to steal upon it and surprise it. He studied the wood mice and tried to dig them out of their burrows, and he learned much about the ways of moose birds and woodpeckers. And there came a day when the hawk's shadow did not drive him crouching into the bushes. He had grown stronger and wiser and more confident. Also, he was desperate. So he sat on his haunches, conspicuously in an open space, and challenged the hawk down out of the sky, for he knew that there, floating in the blue above him, was meat, the meat his stomach yearned after so insistently. But the hawk refused to come down and give battle. The cub crawled away into a thicket and whimpered his disappointment and hunger. The famine broke. The she-wolf brought home meat. It was strange meat, different from any she had brought before. It was a lynx kitten, partly grown like the cub, but not so large. And it was all for him. His mother had satisfied her hunger elsewhere, though he did not know that it was the rest of the lynx litter that had gone to satisfy her. Nor did he know the desperateness of her deed. He knew only that the velvet-furred kitten was meat, and he ate and waxed happier with every mouthful. A full stomach conduces to inaction, and the cub lay in the cave, sleeping against his mother's side. He was aroused by her snarling. Never had he heard her snarl so terribly. Possibly in her whole life it was the most terrible snarl she ever gave. There was reason for it, and none knew it better than she. A lynx's lair is not despoiled with impunity. In the full glare of the afternoon light, crouching in the entrance of the cave, the cub saw the lynx mother. The hair rippled up along his back at the sight. Here was fear, and it did not require his instinct to tell him of it. and as sight alone were not sufficient, the cry of rage the intruder gave began with a snarl, and rushing abruptly upward into a hoarse screech was convincing enough in itself. The cub felt the prod of the life that was in him, and stood up and snarled valiantly by his mother's side. She thrust him ignominiously away and behind her. Because of the low-roofed entrance, the lynx could not leap in, and when she made a crawling rush of it, the she-wolf sprang upon her and pinned her down. The cub saw little of the battle. There was a tremendous snarling and spitting and screeching. The two animals threshed about, the lynx ripping and tearing with her claws and using her teeth as well, while the she-wolf used her teeth alone. Once, the cub sprang in and sank his teeth into the hind leg of the lynx. He clung on, growling savagely, though he did not know it. By the weight of his body, he clogged the action of the leg and thereby saved his mother much damage. A change in the battle crushed him under both their bodies, and the wretched and wrenched loose his hold. The next moment the two mothers separated, and before they rushed together again, the lynx lashed out at the cub with a huge forepaw that ripped his shoulder open to the bone and sent him hurtling sideways against the wall. Then was added to the uproar the cub's shrill yelp of pain and fright. But the fight lasted so long that he had time to cry himself out and to experience a second burst of courage. The end of the battle found him again clinging to a hind leg and furiously growling between his teeth. The lynx was dead, but the she-wolf was very weak and sick. At first, she caressed the cub and licked his wounded shoulder, but the blood she had lost had taken with it her strength, and for all of a day and a night she lay by her dead foe's side without movement, scarcely breathing. For a week, she never left the cave, except for water. Then her movements were slow and painful. At the end of that time, the lynx was devoured, while the she-wolf's wounds had healed sufficiently to permit her to take the meat trail again. It's like Meals on Wheels, except it's like Meals on Paws. It's delivery one way or the other. Extra steps. The cub's shoulder was stiff and sore, and for some time he limped from the terrible slash he had received, but the world now seemed changed. He went about in it with greater confidence, with a feeling of power that he had not in his days before the battle with the lynx. With a feeling of powers that had not been his in the days before the battle with the lynx. Sometimes you gotta slow down when you read. He had looked upon life in a more ferocious aspect. He had fought. He had buried his teeth in the flesh of a foe, and he had survived. And because of all this, he carried himself more boldly, with a touch of defiance that was new in him. He was no longer afraid of minor things, and much of his timidity had vanished, though the unknown never ceased to press upon him with his mysteries and terrors, intangible and ever menacing. He began to accompany his mother on the meat trail, and he saw much of the killing of meat and began to play his part in it. And in his own dim way he learned the law of meat. There were two kinds of life, his own kind and the other kind. His own kind included his mother and himself. The other kind included all living things that moved, and the other kind was divided. One portion was that his own kind killed and ate. This portion was composed of the non-killers and the small killers. The other portion killed and ate his own kind, or was killed and eaten by his own kind. And out of this classification arose the law. The aim of life was meat. Life itself was meat. Life lived on life. Therefore the eaters and the eaten. The law was, eat or be eaten. He did not formulate the law in clear, set terms and moralize about it. He did not even think the law. He merely lived the law without thinking about it at all. He saw the law operating around him on every side. He had eaten the ptarmigan chicks. The hawk had eaten the ptarmigan mother. The hawk would also have eaten him. Later, when he had grown more formidable, he wanted to eat the hawk. He had eaten the lynx kitten. The lynx mother would have eaten him had she not herself been killed and eaten, and so it went. The law was being lived about him by all live things, and he himself was part and parcel of the law. He was a killer. His only food was meat, live meat that ran away swiftly before him, or flew into the air, or climbed trees, or hid in the ground, or faced him and fought with him, or turned the tables and ran after him. Had the cub thought in man fashion, he might have epitomized life as a voracious appetite, and the world as a place wherein ranged a multitude of appetites, pursuing and being pursued, hunting and being hunted, eaten and being eaten, all in blindness and confusion, with violence and disorder, a chaos of gluttony and slaughter, ruled over by chance, merciless, planless, endless. But the cub did not think in man fashion. He did not look at things with wide vision. He was single-purposed and entertained but one thought or desire at a time. Besides the law of meat, there were a myriad other and lesser laws for him to learn and obey. The world was filled with surprise. The stir of the life that was in him, the play of his muscles, was an unending happiness. To run down meat was to experience thrills and elations. His rages and battles were pleasures. Terror itself and the mystery of the unknown led to his living. And there were easements and satisfactions. To have a full stomach, to doze lazily in the sunshine, such things were remuneration in full for his ardors and toils, while his ardors and toils, and now it's tolls instead of toils, were in themselves self-remunerative. They were expressions of life, and life is always happy when it is expressing itself. So the cub had no quarrel with his hostile environment. He was very much alive, very happy, and very proud of himself. Man, that is an extremely long-winded way of saying puppy is part of the natural law, like the natural web, food web of the world. It certainly went on. That's the end of part 2, actually. What do we have for time? We're fine. Is how the puppy learned it. Yeah. And then also explained how the reader should be certain that the puppy isn't learning in the way we think of learning. It's gaining experience and applying instinct to it. It's fine. It's cool. It just goes on for a very long time. I suspect parts 1 and 2 could probably have been skipped. I think part 3 is where, part 3 is like more than half of the book. So I suspect part 3 is where the real story is going to be. I wish I had known that. Not that I would have skipped part 1 and 2, but we could have had a fair warning at the beginning of the stages, I guess. We do have about 40 minutes left, so let's keep going. Part 3, Chapter 1. The Makers of Fire. The cub came upon it suddenly. It was his own fault. He had been careless. He had left the cave and run down to the stream to drink. It might have been that he took no notice because he was heavy with sleep. He had been out all night on the meat trail and had but just then awakened. And his carelessness might have been due to the familiarity of the trail to the pool. He had traveled it often, and nothing had ever happened on it. He went down past the blasted pine, crossed the open space, and trotted in amongst the trees. Then, at the same instant, he saw and smelt before him, sitting silently on their haunches, were 5 live things, the like of which he had never seen before. It was his first glimpse of mankind. But at the sight of him, the 5 men did not spring to their feet, nor show their teeth, nor snarl. They did not move, but sat there, silent and ominous. Nor did the cub move. Every instinct of his nature would have impelled him to dash wildly away, had there not suddenly and for the first time arisen in him another and counter instinct. A great awe descended upon him. He was beaten down to movelessness by an overpowering sense of his own weakness and littleness. Here was mastery and power, something far and away beyond him. Yeah, I don't think animals think that way about us, to be perfectly honest. I think that's ego right there. The cub had never seen man, yet the instinct concerning man was his. In dim ways he recognized in man the animal that had fought itself to primacy over other animals of the wild. Not alone out of his own eyes, but out of the eyes of all his ancestors, was the cub now looking upon man. Out of eyes that had circled in the darkness around countless winter campfires, that had peered from safe distances and from the hearts of thickets at the strange 2-legged animal that was lord over living things. The spell of the cub's heritage was upon him, the fear and the respect born of the centuries of struggle and the accumulated experience of the generations. The heritage was too compelling for a wolf that was only a cub. Had he been full grown, he would have run away. As it was, he cowered down in a paralysis of fear, already half proffering the submission that his kind had proffered from the first time a wolf came to sit by man's fire and be made warm. One of the Native Americans arose and walked over to him and stood above him. That's okay, bold. The cub cowered closer to the ground. It was the unknown, objectified at last in concrete flesh and blood, bending over him and reaching down to seize hold of him. His hair bristled involuntarily, his lips writhed back, and little fangs were bared. The hand poised like doom above him hesitated, and the man spoke, laughing. Okay, there seems to be, perhaps native language, but it also has a translation, so I'm just going to read the English. Look, the White Fangs. The other Indians laughed loudly and urged the man on to pick up the cub. As the hand descended closer and closer, there raged within the cub a battle of instincts. He experienced 2 great impulsions, to yield and to fight. The resulting action was a compromise. He did both. He yielded till the hand almost touched him, then he fought, his teeth flashing in a snap that sank them into the hand. The next moment he received a clout alongside the head that knocked him over on his side. Then all fight fled out of him. His puppyhood and the instinct of submission took charge of him. He sat up on his haunches and keyed, but the man whose hand he had bitten was angry. Well, you're a dumbass then, bro. It's a wild animal you just put your hand on. Of course you're going to get bitten. The fuck is wrong with you? The cub received a clout on the other side of his head, whereupon he sat up and keyed louder than ever. The four natives laughed more loudly, while even the man who had been bitten began to laugh. They surrounded the cub and laughed at him, while he wailed out his terror and his hurt. In the midst of it, he heard something. The natives heard it too, but the cub knew what it was, and with a last long wail that had in it more of triumph than grief, he ceased his noise and waited for the coming of his mother. Of his ferocious and indomitable mother, who fought and killed all things and was never afraid. She was snarling as she ran. She had heard the cry of her cub and was dashing to save him. She bounded in amongst them, her anxious and militant motherhood making her anything but a pretty sight. But to the cub, the spectacle of her protective rage was pleasing. He uttered a glad little cry and bounded to meet her while the man-animals went back hastily several steps. The she-wolf stood over against her cub, facing the men with the bristling hair, a snarling, rumbling deep in her throat. Her face was distorted and malignant with menace. Even the bridge of her nose wrinkled from tip to eye, so prodigious was her snarl. Prodigious, yes. Sorry. Do I recognize the name Jack London? I don't actually. Like, that's the author, but I do not recognize Jack London. I also don't know how long ago you asked that question. Oh, where was I? Oh, yep, was her snarl. From Star Trek TNG when Data goes back in time. Oh, really? I mean, I don't recognize it, but I know Data went back in time and met a bunch of people from I guess this era. That makes sense. Oh, is he the bellboy that helps him? Oh, okay, I vaguely kind of remember that scene. Yep. Then it was that a cry went up from one of the men. Kichi was what he uttered. It was an exclamation of surprise. The cub felt his mother wilting at the sound. Kichi, the man cried again, this time with sharpness and authority. Then the cub saw his mother, the she-wolf, the fearless one, crouching down till her belly touched the ground, whimpering, wagging her tail, making peace signs. The cub could not understand. He was appalled. The awe of man rushed over him again. His instinct had been true. His mother verified it. She too rendered submission to the man-animals. The man who had spoken came over to her. He put his hand upon her head, and she only crouched closer. She did not snap, nor threaten to snap. The other men came up and surrounded her and felt her and pawed her. Which actions she made no attempt to resent. They were greatly excited, and made many noises with their mouths. These noises were not indication of danger, the cub decided as he crouched near his mother, still bristling from time to time, but doing his best to submit. It is not strange, a native was saying. Her father was a wolf, it is true. Her mother was a dog. But did not my brother tie her out in the woods all of 3 nights in the mating season? Therefore, was the father of Kichi a wolf? Oh, yes. It sounds like that should be a question, but there is no question mark, so it's confusing. It is a year, Grey Beaver, since she ran away, spoke a second native. It is not strange, Salmon Tongue, Grey Beaver answered. It was the time of the famine, and there was no meat for the dogs. She has lived with the wolves, said a third native. So it would seem, Three Eagles, Grey Beaver answered, laying his hand on the cub, and this be the sign of it. The cub snarled a little at the touch of the hand, and the hand flew back to administer a clout, whereupon the cub covered its fangs, sank down submissively, while the hand, returning, rubbed behind his ears and up and down his back. This be the sign of it, Grey Beaver went on. It is plain that his mother is Kichi, but his father was a wolf. Therefore there is in him little dog and much wolf. His fangs be white, and White Fang shall be his name. I have spoken. He is my dog. For was not Kichi my brother's dog? And this is not my brother, and is not my brother dead? Really sounds like wills are pretty well laid out. Hello, Gwen. I have a visitor. A Gwen with a very finely relaxed and normal normal posture of her own.
When come on. Up. Gwen. Up. Come on. Good girl, good girl. There you go. I'll give you a knee up.
You gonna cause trouble? I mean, you can cause trouble tonight. I don't have a game to play.
Hey, hi.
Come here. Come here, baby.
No? Okay.
Go sit down, baby. We're gonna do some more reading. You want a ball? Okay, I have to throw a ball for the kitty cat. Okay, Gwen, come on.
Do this one, okay? Do your scritches. Good girl. Ready? Ready?
That's nice. That's a very normal behavior. I tried throwing the ball for Gwen earlier today, and she ran into her sister and started hissing instead.
Good girl. Another one. Okay, one more. Last one.
Okay, that was a 180 turn in the hallway. Sometimes it bounces off of something and goes the wrong way. Every time you tell her it's the last one, she remembers to bring the ball all the way back.
Let me take a break. Ready?
You sprayed Maybe's head with catnip to try and help. Yeah, I thought that should help. She seems much more normal now. Okay, Gwen, all done. All gone. Back to work. Good girl. All right, let's see. Oh, let's see. The cub who. Okay, and is my brother, and is not my brother dead. All right. The cub who had thus received a name in the world lay and watched. For a time, the man animals continued to make their mouth noises. Then Grey Beaver took a knife from a sheath that hung around his neck and went into the thicket and cut a stick. White Fang watched him. He noticed the stick at each end and in the notches fastened strings of raw hide. One string he tied around the throat of Kichi. Then he led her to a small pine around which he tied the other string. White Fang followed and lay down beside her. Salmon Tongue's hand reached out to him and rolled him over on his back. Kichi looked on anxiously. White Fang felt fear mounting in him. He could not quite suppress a snarl, but he made no offer to snap. The hand, with fingers crooked and spread out, rubbed his stomach in a playful way and rolled him from side to side. It was ridiculous and ungainly, laying there on his back with his legs sprawled in the air. Besides, it was a position of such utter helplessness that White Fang's whole nature revolted against it. Yeah, I can hear her meowing through my own headset. He could do nothing to defend himself. If this man animal intended harm, White Fang knew he could not escape it. How could he spring away with his 4 legs in the air above him? Yet submission made him master his fear, and he only growled softly. This growl he could not suppress, nor did the man animal resent it by giving him a blow on the head. And furthermore, such was the strangeness of it, White Fang experienced an unaccountable sensation of pleasure as the hand rubbed back and forth. When he was rolled on his side, he ceased to growl. When the fingers pressed and prodded at the base of his ears, the pleasurable sensation increased, and when, with a final rub and scratch, the man left him alone and went away, all fear had died out of White Fang. He was to know fear many times in his dealing with man, yet it was a token of the fearless companionship with man that was ultimately to be his. After a time, White Fang heard strange noises approaching. He was quick in his classification, for he knew them at once for man-animal noises. A few minutes later, the remainder of the tribe, strung out as it was on the march, trailed in. There were more men, and many women and children, 40 souls of them, and all heavily burdened with camp equipage and an outfit. Also, there were many dogs, and these, with the exception of the part-grown puppies, were likewise burdened with camp outfit, on their backs, in bags that fastened tightly around underneath. The dogs carried from 20 to 30 pounds of weight. And then we still hear Gwen meowing. What do you want, Gwen? No. She's very normal now. White Fang had never seen dogs before, but at sight of them he felt that they were his own kind, only somehow different. But they displayed little difference from the wolf when they discovered the cub and his mother. There was a rush. White Fang bristled and snarled and snapped in the face of the open-mouthed oncoming wave of dogs and went down and under them. Feeling the sharp slash of teeth in his body, himself biting and tearing at the legs and bellies above him, there was a great uproar. He could hear the snarl of Kichi as she fought for him, and he could hear the cries of the man-animals, the sound of clubs striking upon bodies, and the yelps of pain from the dogs so struck. Gwen. Good girl. Good girl. Yeah. Good girl. Only a few seconds elapsed before he was on his feet again. He could now see the man-animals driving back the dogs with clubs and stones, defending him, saving him from the savage teeth of his kind that somehow was not his kind. And though there was no reason in his brain for a clear conception of so abstract a thing as justice, nevertheless, in his own way, he felt the justice of the man-animals, and he knew them for what they were, makers of law and executors of law. Also, he appreciated the power with which they administered the law. Unlike any animals he had ever encountered, they did not bite or claw. They enforced their lives' strength with the power of dead things. Dead things did their bidding. Thus sticks and stones directed by these strange creatures leaped through the air like living things, inflicting grievous hurts upon the dogs. So humans are necromancers. Gwen. Meow, meow, meow. What you doing? What you doing, baby? Hey? Oh, Bunny, thank you for the hydrate, the head pat, and the sit upright. What a cat wants to do. Oh, maybe might be incoming. Oh, okay, we'll see how that goes. Be happy while you can, Gwen. Oh, sit upright. Right. Oh, where were we? Inflicting, grievous hurts upon the dogs, right? To his mind, this power was unusual, power inconceivable and beyond the natural power that was godlike. White Fang, in the very nature of him, could never know anything about gods. At the best, he could know only things that were beyond knowing. But the wonder and awe that he had of these man-animals in ways resembled what would be the wonder and awe of man at the sight of some celestial creature on a mountaintop hurling thunderbolts from either hand at an astonished world. The last dog had been driven back. The hubbub died down, and White Fang licked his hurts and meditated upon this, his first taste of pack cruelty and his introduction to the pack. He had never dreamed that his own kind consisted of more than One Eye, his mother, and himself. They had constituted a kind apart, and here, abruptly, he had discovered many more creatures apparently of his own kind, and there was a subconscious resentment that these, his kind, at first sight had pitched upon him and tried to destroy him. In the same way, he resented his mother being tied with a stick, even though it was done by the superior man-animals. It savored of the trap, of bondage. Yet of the trap and of bondage he knew nothing. Freedom to roam and run and lie down at will had been his heritage, and here it was being infringed upon. His mother's movements were restricted to the length of a stick, and by the length of that same stick he was restricted, for he had not yet got beyond the need of his mother's side. He did not like it. Nor did he like it when the man-animals arose and went on with their march, for a tiny man-animal took the other end of the stick and led Ch1 captive behind him, and behind Ch1 followed White Fang, greatly perturbed and worried by this new adventure he had entered upon. They went down the valley of the stream, far beyond White Fang's widest ranging, until they came to the end of the valley, where the stream ran into the Mackenzie River. Here, where canoes were cached on poles high in the air, and where stood fish racks for the drying of fish, camp was made. And White Fang looked on with wondering eyes. The superiority of these man-animals increased with every moment. There was their mastery over all these sharp-fanged dogs. It breathed of power. But greater than that to the wolf cub was their mastery over things not alive. Their capacity to communicate motion to unmoving things, their capacity to change the very face of the world. It was this last that especially affected him. The elevation of frames of poles caught his eye, yet this in itself was not so remarkable, being done by the same creatures that flung sticks and stones to great distances. But when the frames of poles were made into teepees, by being covered with cloth and skins, White Fang was astounded. It was the colossal bulk of them that impressed him. They arose around him on every side, like some monstrous quick-growing form of life. They occupied nearly the whole circumference of his field of vision. He was afraid of them. They loomed ominously above him, and when the breeze stirred them into huge movements, he cowered down in fear, keeping his eyes warily upon them, and prepared to spring away if they attempted to precipitate themselves upon him. But in a short while his fear of the teepees passed away. He saw the women and children passing in and out of them without harm, and he saw the dogs trying often to get into them, and being driven away with sharp words and flying stones. After a time he left Ch1's side and crawled cautiously toward the wall of the nearest teepee. It was the curiosity of growth that urged him on, the necessity of learning and living and doing that brings experience. The last few inches to the wall of the teepee were crawled with painful slowness and precaution. The day's events had prepared him for the unknown to manifest itself in most stupendous and unthinkable ways. At last his nose touched the canvas. He waited. Nothing happened. And he smelled the strange fabric, saturated with the man smell. He closed on the canvas with his teeth and gave a gentle tug. Nothing happened, though the adjacent portions of the teepee moved. He tugged harder. There was a greater movement. It was delightful. He tugged still harder and repeatedly until the whole teepee was in motion. Then the sharp cry of a squaw inside sent him scampering back to Ch1. But after that, he was afraid no more of the looming bulks of the teepees. Cheeky little puppy. A moment later, he was straying away again from his mother. Her stick was tied to a peg in the ground, and she could not follow him. A part-grown puppy, somewhat larger and older than he, came toward him slowly, with ostentatious and belligerent importance. The puppy's name, as White Fang was afterward to hear him called, was Lip Lip. He had experience in puppy fights and was already something of a bully. Lip Lip was White Fang's own kind, and being only a puppy, he did not seem dangerous, so White Fang prepared to meet him in a friendly spirit. But when the stranger's walk became stiff-legged and his lips lifted clear of his lip, White Fang stiffened too, and answered with lifted lips. They half-circled about each other, tentatively, snarling and bristling. This lasted several minutes, and White Fang was beginning to enjoy it as a sort of game. But suddenly, with remarkable swiftness, Lip Lip leaped in, delivering a slashing snap, and leaped away again. The snap had taken effect on the shoulder that had been hurt by the lynx, and that was still sore deep down near the bone. The surprise and hurt of it brought a yelp out of White Fang, but the next moment, in a rush of anger, he was upon Lip Lip, snapping viciously. But Lip Lip had lived his life in a camp and had fought many puppy fights. 3 times, 4 times, and half a dozen times his sharp little teeth scored on the newcomer, until White Fang, yelping shamelessly, fled to the protection of his mother. It was the first of the many fights he was to have with Lip Lip, for they were enemies from the start, born so with natures destined perpetually to clash. Ch1 licked White Fang soothingly with her tongue, and tried to prevail upon him to remain with her, but his curiosity was rampant, and several minutes later he was venturing forth on a new quest. He came upon one of the man animals, Grey Beaver, who was squatting on his hams and doing something with sticks and dry moss spread before him on the ground. White Fang came near him and watched. Grey Beaver made mouth noises, which White Fang interpreted as not hostile, so he came still nearer. And it looks like we have ads coming. How much more of this do we have? Oh, thank you, guard. I'll stand up. Alright. And welcome to the stream. Oh, we never did see maybe. Alright. We have a few chapters to go. But I don't think I'm going to hit it in 3 minutes. So we are... What? Oh, we might give it a try. We'll see how we go. Women in... No, you know what? No, we're not going to do it. We're going to do ads very quickly. We'll come back and finish up, and then we'll call it a night. Get to the end of the chapter. See you in 3. Okay, welcome back. Didn't know there was a movie. I probably should have known there was a movie, but have we seen? I don't think we've seen the movie. I don't think I've seen the movie. I see. White Fang is approaching Grey Beaver after he makes mouth noises. You've seen the movie? Well, you've seen many movies. I haven't, I suppose, really. Let's see. Women and children were carrying more sticks and branches to Grey Beaver. It was evidently an affair of moment. White Fang came in until he touched Grey Beaver's knee. So curious was he, and already forgetful that this was a terrible man animal. Suddenly he saw a strange thing like mist beginning to arise from the sticks and moss beneath Grey Beaver's hands. Then, amongst the sticks themselves, appeared a living thing, twisting and turning, of a color like the color of the sun in the sky. White Fang knew nothing about fire. It drew him as the light in the mouth of the cave had drawn him in his early puppyhood. He crawled the several steps toward the flame. He heard Grey Beaver chuckle above him, and he knew the sound was not hostile. Then his nose touched the flame, and at the same instant his little tongue went out to it. Yikes. For a moment he was paralyzed. The unknown, lurking in the midst of the sticks and moss, was savagely clutching him by the nose. He scrambled backward, bursting out in an astonished explosion of keys at the sound. Ch1 leaped snarling to the end of her stick, and there raged terribly because she could not come to his aid. But Grey Beaver laughed loudly and slapped his thighs, and told the happening to all the rest of the camp till everybody was laughing uproariously. But White Fang sat on his haunches and keyed, a forlorn and pitiable little figure in the midst of the man-animals. It was the worst hurt he had ever known. Both nose and tongue had been scorched by the live thing, sun-colored, that had grown up under Grey Beaver's hands. He cried and cried interminably, and every fresh wail was greeted by bursts of laughter on the part of the man-animals. What a bunch of bastards. He tried to soothe his nose with his tongue, but the tongue was burnt too, and the two hurts coming together produced greater hurt, whereupon he cried more hopelessly and helplessly than ever. And then shame came to him. He knew laughter and the meaning of it. It is not given to us to know how animals know laughter and know when they are being laughed at, but it was this same way that White Fang knew it. But it was this same way that White Fang knew it. And he felt shame that the man-animals should be laughing at him. He turned and fled away, not from the hurt of the fire, but from the laughter that sank even deeper and hurt the spirit of him. And he fled to Kichi, raging at the end of her stick like an animal gone mad. To Kichi, the one creature in the world who was not laughing at him. Twilight drew down and night came on, and White Fang lay by his mother's side. His nose and tongue still hurt, but he was perplexed by a greater trouble. He was homesick. He felt a vacancy in him, a need for the hush and the quietude of the stream and the cave and the cliff. Life had become too populous. There were so many of the man-animals, men, women, and children, all making noises and irritations. And there were the dogs, ever squabbling and bickering, bursting into uproars and creating confusions. The restful loneliness of the only life he had known was gone. Here, the very air was palpitant with life. It hummed and buzzed unceasingly, continually changing its intensity and abruptly variant in pitch. It impinged on his nerves and senses and made him nervous and restless and worried him with a perpetual immense of happening. A perpetual imminence of happening. He watched the man-animals coming and going and moving about the camp, in fashion distantly resembling the way men look upon the gods they create. So looked White Fang upon the man-animals before him. They were superior creatures, of a verity gods. To his dim comprehension, they were as much wonder-workers as gods are to men. They were creatures of mastery, possessing all manner of unknown and impossible potencies, overlords of the alive and the not alive, making obey that which moved, imparting movement to that which did not move, and making life, sun-colored and biting life, to grow out of dead moss and wood. They were fire makers. They were gods. All right. That's the end of the first chapter of part 3. So we got to part 3, I suppose. I don't think I believe that animals think this way. I don't think they look at us as gods. I think that's a crazy idea. Certainly, my experience with my animals have been relationships of equality. We serve different purposes in a family unit, and I think that's how I believe it is. You know, no citation offered, I suppose. But Gwen and Maybe don't look at us as beings of superiority. They look at us as, okay, we bring a lot of food. We are the food givers most of the time. Sometimes they will hunt socks and provide those for us. That's very nice of them. But the perception is we offer food. They offer purrs and the ability to be sat upon by kitty cats, and then napped upon. Yes, that's what they offer. Yeah, they're talking about dogs. I get it. Like, it's a similar relationship, right? These are both domesticated animals. White Fang is, in theory, a feral animal. It was born in the wild and grew up in the wild for a little while, and then was suddenly brought into a domestic situation. The fact that his mother was domestic is helping, I suppose, and I'm fine with that. But the fact is, I think White Fang is going through a lot of learning, right? It's his experience is expanding, but I don't think he would think of man the way man thinks of God. Like, first of all, like, humans are there. Like, they're physically there. They're physically doing things. They are living things, just like White Fang is a living thing. They're just doing different things. And other things that he's not experienced are happening when they're around because of potentially what they're doing. This is how I would describe it. You even met White Fang. You've seen the movie. You even met White Fang. Okay, so White Fang's real. That's interesting. It is definitely an older thinking of people to animals, I think. Yeah. Dogs are family. Cats are family. There's the superiority thing is bullshit. Yeah, they have different behaviors, right? Dogs and cats have different kind of ways of familial interaction with their peers, but we're peers. We are not gods. Yeah, and I don't think animals think of us that way. I don't believe it. But we will continue this next Monday. Yeah, next Monday. I'm pretty sure. I don't think am I planning? I know we have some things coming up. I don't think I'm planning on canceling anything just yet. We're definitely going to cancel stuff when we get up to Anime North time, because we will be doing Anime North things that I am definitely not going to be able to stream at that point in time. I'm trying to look for a calendar. Ooh, my car insurance expires. I think I've renewed that. I should probably double. No, yeah, I've renewed that. I have the new papers up there. Yeah. I'll be around. You will mod from Not Our Home. Yeah, Valana's going on a trip, a little trip, and she will do that from abroad. Oh, I see. I finally have your. Yeah, is that your? No, I don't. Whatever. Oh, Google Calendars, you frustrate me. So much frustrating. Anyhow, yeah, they're fine. Yeah, so next Monday we'll be doing this. The usual on Thursday we will be collaborating with Queen Fruit. We will be playing more Gears of War 4, in which nobody will be chainsawed apart, probably. Just going on statistical likelihood of coolness factors. Friday and Sunday morning. Yeah, Sunday morning we'll be doing. I think I'm only going to do Space Marines on one of those nights. Let's do Space Marine on Sundays. Let's start doing a 3-game rotation. And right now, I think we'll do Helldivers on Friday night. Yeah, we'll do Helldivers on Friday night, Space Marines on Sunday morning, and Gears of War 4 on Thursdays. This will be our game rotation, and I'll probably forget it. So Valana, you're going to have to remind me of what I'm going to do there. I'll put that in my schedule on Twitch eventually. And going forward, I'm going to try doing a 3-game rotation. So eventually when Gears of War 4 is done, I'll take that out of my computer, and I might install Wild. I might install Deep Rock Galactic too, because I haven't done that in a while. Yeah, let's install Deep Rock Galactic after Gears of War 4 until Master Rank for Wilds comes out. I think I've played Wilds out a fair bit. I haven't finished all of the content, but I'm stuck on this pattern of I have like 12 pages of things to make. My brain's thinking to myself, yeah, I should just go finish that. I'm like, but anyways, maybe we'll try DRG for a few weeks and then give up on that. But that's deep in the future. Why don't we try to find ourselves someone to raid into, I think. Oh, can I please have this, and this? Whom do we have? Of the 17 billion people who are streaming tonight, a person with a quieter persuasion at the very least. Do we have a category match? I wouldn't mind going into a category, a matching category. Okay, this person's not doing anything. That person's not doing anything. Like many of these streams are just, you know, too quiet. That's okay. Literally nothing happening in that one. Maybe everyone's gone to sleep. That would be challenging. Oh, here's someone actually reading Dracula. We're going to go read this random person here. Yes.